My name is Harper. I am 32 years old, and I work as a venture capital risk analyst. I evaluate failing investments and calculate liabilities for a living. Yet, I never predicted the catastrophic default that occurred at my younger brother's wedding reception, when I politely refused my parents' public demand to sign over the $500,000 home I had just built from scratch. My father picked up a heavy, brass floral centerpiece and swung it directly at my skull. As I collapsed to the marble floor, my brother's new bride snatched the microphone from his hand and exposed a financial secret that dismantled their entire fake empire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against toxic relatives who felt entitled to your hard-earned success. The ballroom of the Miami luxury hotel smelled of expensive orchids and salt water. 300 guests clinked crystal champagne flutes, celebrating the union of my 28-year-old brother Julian and his stunning bride Maya. Maya was an African-American corporate compliance director with a razor-sharp intellect. She looked radiant in her tailored white gown. Julian played the part of the wealthy groom, flashing a custom-tailored tuxedo and smiling for the cameras. Our parents, Thomas and Evelyn, held court at the head table. They basked in the attention, treating the event like their own personal coronation. I sat quietly near the edge of the bridal party section, wearing a simple emerald dress. I spent my weeks tearing apart balance sheets and auditing corporate portfolios. Weddings were just another social obligation where I played the role of the quiet single sister. The string quartet faded out as Thomas stood up. He tapped a silver spoon against his glass. The room settled into a hushed, expectant silence. He smoothed his silk tie and smiled at the gathered crowd. "We are here to celebrate Julian and Maya," my father announced, his voice echoing through the sound system. "Julian is building an incredible future, but starting a new life requires a strong foundation. Evelyn and I raised our children to support one another. Harper has always been the practical one. She lives a quiet, solitary life. She certainly does not need the excess space of that sprawling new property she just finished building in the suburbs." A cold chill moved through my chest. I set my water glass down. "So, as a testament to our family bond," Thomas continued, gesturing expansively toward me, "Harper has decided to gift her newly constructed $500,000 home to the newlyweds. It is the perfect place for Julian to raise a real family." The ballroom erupted in enthusiastic applause. 300 wealthy guests turned to look at me, beaming with admiration for my supposed generosity. Evelyn offered a tight, expectant smile, silently commanding me to play along. Julian leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink, wearing a smug grin that communicated he had already packed his bags to move into my master bedroom. They cornered me. They weaponized the social pressure of a luxury wedding to extort my real estate. They expected me to shrink under the weight of hundreds of staring eyes, smile meekly, and hand over the keys to the property I had funded with my own grueling 80-hour work weeks. I stood up. The fabric of my dress brushed against the heavy oak chair. I walked directly to the head table, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the polished marble floor. I extended my hand. Thomas, assuming I was going to deliver a tearful speech of sisterly devotion, handed me the microphone. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces. Then, I turned to look my father dead in the eye. "I am wishing Julian and Maya a beautiful marriage," I said, keeping my tone measured and clinical. "But there is a slight correction to the announcement. My home is the result of my own capital and labor. It is not a charity handout, and it is certainly not a wedding gift. I am keeping my house." The applause died instantly. A suffocating silence blanketed the sprawling ballroom. The guests exchanged uncomfortable, bewildered glances. Evelyn dropped her hands to her lap, her face draining of color. Maya sat perfectly still, her sharp eyes darting between Julian and me. Sensing the underlying rot in the family dynamic, Thomas stood frozen. I had just stripped away his patriarchal authority in front of the entire Miami elite. He did not see an independent woman defending her assets. He saw a disobedient subordinate humiliating him. The veins in his neck pulled taut against his collar. His face flushed a dark, dangerous shade of crimson. He did not reach for the microphone to smooth over the awkward tension. He reached for the table. His hand closed around the thick base of a heavy brass floral centerpiece. He swung his arm in a rapid, fluid arc. The heavy metal connected with the side of my head with a sickening crack. Pain exploded behind my eyes. The bright chandelier lights streaked into blinding white flashes. I felt the warm rush of blood slide down my temple before my knees buckled. The last sound I heard before the darkness pulled me under was the chaotic scream of the wedding guests, followed by the sharp, high-pitched feedback of the microphone hitting the floor. The cold marble floor sent a sharp shock through my system the second my cheek struck the polished stone. My vision fractured into jagged shards of light and dark shadows. A warm, thick liquid pooled rapidly near my right eye, soaking into the pristine white fabric of the table runner I had dragged down with me during the fall. The heavy brass centerpiece hit the ground a fraction of a second later, rolling in a lazy metallic circle before stopping near my father's expensive leather shoes. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. 300 members of Miami high society froze in their seats. The lively chatter, the clinking of crystal flutes, the soft jazz music, everything died in an instant. For a fleeting second, there was only the sound of my ragged breathing and the steady drip of my own blood hitting the floor. Thomas stood directly above me. His chest heaved beneath his custom tuxedo. He did not drop to his knees to check my pulse. He did not scream for a doctor. He simply stared down at his own hands, flexing his fingers, as if irritated by the physical exertion required to strike his own daughter. He looked around the room, his face tight with indignation, expecting the crowd to somehow validate his violent outburst. He wanted them to understand that I had provoked him by defying his public command. Instead, the elite guests shrank back in horror. Women in expensive designer gowns pulled their husbands away from the head table. The illusion of the perfect, wealthy Montgomery family fractured permanently right in front of their eyes. Then the silence was violently pierced by a sharp, high-pitched electronic screech. The audio feedback echoed off the vaulted ceilings, forcing several guests to cover their ears. I blinked through the haze of pain, trying to focus my blurring vision toward the source of the noise. Maya stood at the center of the dais. Her posture was rigid, her spine straight as an arrow. As a corporate compliance director, she spent her entire career investigating fraud, identifying liabilities, and navigating high-stakes crises. She was trained to spot a sinking ship and sever ties before the vessel pulled her under. She did not play the role of the hysterical bride. She did not weep or collapse into Julian arms. She looked down at me, bleeding on the floor, then turned her sharp, dark eyes toward the man she had just married. Julian was cowering near the wedding cake, his face pale, his hands shaking. He offered zero protection, zero explanation, and zero courage. Maya saw the cowardice radiating from his core. Her jaw locked. She made a ruthless, instantaneous calculation. She snatched the microphone right out of the microphone stand, her grip tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Thomas reached out, attempting to reclaim his authority. "Maya, give me that," he demanded, his voice low and threatening. "We need to call security and handle this family matter privately. Do not make a scene." Maya did not retreat. She stepped forward, invading his personal space, and shoved his extended arm away with her free hand. She raised the microphone to her lips, her eyes scanning the sea of shocked faces in the ballroom. She locked eyes with her own parents, sitting at the front tables. Her father, a retired federal judge, and her mother, a prominent surgeon, looked on with deep rising alarm. "I need everyone to listen to me very carefully," Maya announced, her voice carrying a lethal, icy authority that commanded the entire room. "I apologize to my family and to my friends who traveled across the country to be here tonight. I brought you into a crime scene, and for that, I am deeply sorry." Julian scrambled forward, his panic overriding his cowardice. "Maya, stop," he pleaded, reaching for her custom lace sleeve. "Put the mic down. We can talk about this upstairs." "Please do not do this." Maya yanked her arm back as if his touch burned her skin. She glared at him with unvarnished disgust. "There is no conversation, Julian." She spoke directly into the microphone, amplifying her rejection for the entire venue to hear. For the past 2 years, this man claimed he was running a highly successful artificial intelligence startup. He presented fake financial portfolios to my parents. He bragged about secure venture capital funding. He played the part of a young visionary, ready to conquer the tech industry. The crowd murmured, the whispers spreading like wildfire among the venture capitalists and real estate developers seated at the prime tables. "It is all a lie," Maya declared, dropping the ultimate bombshell. "Julian does not have a tech startup. He does not have a single legitimate client. He has zero revenue. I ran a background audit on his primary vendor accounts this morning after noticing irregularities in our joint tax filings." Evelyn jumped up from her chair, her face a mask of panicked desperation. She tried to maintain her socialite smile, waving her hands frantically at the guests. "She is just overwhelmed," Evelyn shouted, trying to drown out the sound system. "The wedding stress is getting to her. Please, everyone just enjoy your drinks." Maya ignored my mother entirely, pressing her attack with surgical precision. The diamond ring on my finger, the deposit for this luxury hotel, the catering, the floral arrangements. Every single aspect of this wedding was paid for using stolen corporate credit cards. Maya revealed, her voice slicing through Evelyn's pathetic defense. He hijacked the identities of his former business partners and maxed out illegal credit lines to fund this entire charade. He is drowning in millions of dollars of toxic debt to predatory lenders. The ballroom erupted. The sophisticated facade of the Miami elite shattered into chaotic shouting. Maya parents stood up, their faces tight with fury, realizing their daughter had nearly been chained to a federal criminal. Guests pulled out their smartphones, recording the spectacular downfall of the groom. The very people Thomas wanted to impress were now documenting his public ruin. And to cover his tracks, Maya continued, pointing a steady finger directly at my father. He conspired with his parents to extort his sister. They orchestrated this public ambush tonight because Julian is broke. He needed Harper to sign over her house so he could immediately mortgage the property and pay off the loan sharks breathing down his neck. They invited you all here to witness a robbery. Evelyn lost her remaining shred of sanity. She lunged across the head table, her manicured hands reaching aggressively for the microphone. Maya did not fight her for it. She simply dropped the heavy electronic device onto the marble floor. It hit the ground with a loud, heavy thud, severing the audio feed. Maya reached up to the crown of her head. Without a single ounce of hesitation, she ripped the expensive custom veil from her hair, destroying the intricate bridal updo the stylist had spent hours perfecting. She threw the delicate white tulle directly into Julian's face, rejecting him, discarding his fake empire, and severing their legal ties before the marriage certificate could even be filed. She turned her back on the groom and dropped to her knees right beside me. The cold marble floor felt like ice against my skin, but Maya's hands were warm and efficient. She grabbed a thick linen napkin from a nearby table, pressing it firmly against the deep gash on my temple. "Keep your eyes open, Harper." Maya ordered, her voice losing its public edge, becoming fierce and protective. "Do not go to sleep. My father is calling the paramedics right now. Stay with me." I tried to nod, but the room was spinning violently. The edges of my vision darkened, turning the vibrant ballroom into a narrow tunnel of shadows. I could hear the escalating chaos around us. Maya's father was shouting at hotel security, demanding they lock the doors to prevent Thomas and Julian from fleeing the venue. My mother was weeping near the cake, begging her country club friends to stop filming the disaster. My breathing grew shallow. The adrenaline that had kept me conscious was rapidly fading, replaced by a heavy, suffocating exhaustion. Through the closing tunnel of my vision, I saw Thomas moving. He was not checking the exits. He was not trying to comfort his hysterical wife or his exposed son. He dropped to a low crouch, using the chaotic movement of the panicked guests to shield his actions. He crawled toward the edge of the head table where my small evening clutch had fallen during the assault. My brain processed his movements, but my motor functions were entirely paralyzed. I could not speak. I could not raise my hand to stop him. I could only watch through half-closed eyelids as my father unclasped the metal latch of my purse. His eyes darted around the room, assessing the threat level like a cornered animal calculating its survival strategy. Julian Fake Wealth was gone. Maya had exposed the credit card fraud. The police were inbound, and the loan sharks would be looking for their money by morning. Thomas knew their entire lifestyle was about to implode. He needed an immediate asset. He needed a place to hide and a property to leverage. His hand slipped inside my clutch. I watched his fingers extract my mobile phone and slide it smoothly into his tuxedo pocket. Then he reached back inside. He pulled out the heavy brass keyring, holding the keys to my newly constructed home, the exact property he had demanded just minutes prior. Thomas looked down at me, his expression devoid of any paternal remorse. He looked at my bleeding head, my pale face, and the linen napkin Maya held against my wound. He offered a cold, calculating smirk, slipping my house keys into his pocket alongside my phone. He stood up, blending seamlessly into the crowd of fleeing guests, abandoning his son and his wife to face the authorities alone. He stole my sanctuary right out from under me, while I lay bleeding on the floor. The heavy darkness finally overtook me, pulling my consciousness down into an empty void. The screams of the wedding guests, the pressure of Maya hands, and the wail of the approaching sirens all faded into dead silence. I surrendered to the dark, knowing my enemies had just stolen the very keys to my survival. The sharp scent of rubbing alcohol and iodine dragged me back to consciousness. I opened my eyes to harsh fluorescent lights buzzing steadily overhead. A dull, rhythmic throb pulsed behind my right temple, sending waves of localized pain across my forehead. I reached up with a heavy arm and felt the scratchy texture of medical gauze taped firmly to my skin. 8 tight stitches secured the wound where my father had fractured my skull with the brass centerpiece. The monitor beside my bed beeped with a sterile clinical cadence. I was entirely alone. There were no flowers resting on the plastic bedside table. There were no anxious parents waiting in the uncomfortable vinyl chairs. The heavy wooden door pushed open. A young attending physician walked in holding a digital tablet. He looked at me with a mixture of professional pity and quiet relief that I was awake and tracking his movements. He shined a small penlight into my pupils, checking my neurological responses. He informed me that the paramedics brought me in unaccompanied. The police had arrived at the wedding reception, but the elite guests had already scattered. My family fled the venue long before the ambulance even backed into the loading bay. They left me bleeding on the ballroom floor. The doctor then handed me a clipboard containing the admission paperwork. Since no next of kin stayed to claim responsibility, the hospital listed me as the sole guarantor for the emergency trauma services. I handed the clipboard back without shedding a single tear. Crying is a biological response to emotional distress. As a venture capital risk analyst, I was trained to compartmentalize trauma and focus entirely on mitigating structural liabilities. My father striking me was a profound emotional betrayal, but him stealing my phone and my house keys was a calculated operational breach. I needed to assess the financial damage. I looked at the nurse who had followed the doctor into the room to check my intravenous line. I offered a polite, tired smile and spun a highly credible story. I told her I needed to contact my insurance provider immediately to authorize the emergency room coverage. She nodded sympathetically and handed me her clinical tablet, stepping out into the hallway to give me privacy. The moment the door clicked shut, my demeanor shifted from a recovering patient to a forensic auditor. I opened a secure browser tab and initiated a virtual private network protocol. I bypassed the standard hospital firewalls, connecting directly to my proprietary cloud management infrastructure. My fingers tapped rapidly across the glass screen, entering the complex alphanumeric sequences required to unlock my primary financial dashboard. I expected to see my standard balance intact. I expected to formulate a strategy to cancel my stolen credit cards and schedule a locksmith to change the deadbolts on my front door. Instead, the screen loaded and delivered a shock that easily eclipsed the physical pain radiating through my skull. The numbers on the digital ledger were dropping in real time. My personal checking and standard savings accounts were actively hemorrhaging cash. A transaction for $12,000 processed while I was staring directly at the monitor. 30 seconds later, another charge for $8,500 cleared the system. My pulse spiked, causing the heart monitor next to the bed to chirp a rapid warning alarm. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my heart rate down. Panic causes blindness. I needed actionable data. I clicked into the transaction history, tracing the routing numbers of the outgoing wire transfers. The funds were not being diverted to random offshore accounts by a generic hacker. The recipient names attached to the wire transfers were glaringly familiar. The $12,000 payment went directly to an elite criminal defense firm in downtown Miami. This was the kind of boutique law firm that specialized in keeping wealthy executives out of jail for felony assault. Thomas was using my own money to purchase his legal immunity against the very crime he committed against me. The $8,500 payment was routed to the luxury hotel where the wedding took place. Julian and Thomas were systematically paying off the stolen credit card debts Maya had exposed during her speech, hoping to silence the angry vendors before the police filed formal grand larceny charges. They were liquidating my savings to erase their criminal footprint. A bank does not simply allow a third party to drain a high-yield savings account without triggering severe security protocols. I maintained strict dual authentication on all my personal assets. I opened the administrative logs to see exactly how Thomas bypassed the fraud detection algorithms of a major national bank. The digital trail revealed a breathtaking level of premeditation. The bank records showed an incoming fax received just an hour after I arrived at the emergency room. The document was a medical power of attorney. I pulled up the scanned image from the bank archive. The legal form granted Thomas full unrestricted executive control over my finances and medical decisions in the event of my incapacitation. I zoomed in on the signature line. It was my handwriting perfectly replicated. But the date stamped next to the notary seal was what truly chilled my blood. The document was notarized 14 months ago. Thomas had not forged this paperwork in a sudden panic after hitting me. He had orchestrated this legal trap over a year ago. He always viewed my financial independence as a direct threat to his patriarchal authority. He anticipated a scenario where he might need to seize my resources, and he prepared the mechanism well in advance. Tonight gave him the perfect opportunity. I was unconscious in a trauma ward. He presented the forged document to the bank emergency liaison, claiming I was in critical condition and he needed immediate liquidity to cover life-saving surgical procedures. The bank authorized the override based on his desperate performance. He hijacked my financial identity while I was lying on a hospital gurney. I watched another $3,000 vanish from the checking account, paying off the floral vendor Julian had defrauded. They were working fast, trying to drain every available cent before I woke up and regained control of the narrative. They wanted me destitute, unable to afford legal counsel, and incapable of fighting back. I sat back against the stiff hospital pillows. The throbbing in my head dulled, replaced by a cold, mechanical clarity. Thomas believed he had executed a flawless hostile takeover. He thought he had severed my lifeline. He assumed the accounts attached to my social security number represented the totality of my wealth. He viewed me as a simple analyst, earning a standard corporate salary, saving my pennies in a traditional retail bank. He was entirely wrong. When you spend your days evaluating the risk profiles of high-burn tech startups, you learn exactly how to insulate capital. The personal accounts Thomas was currently looting were nothing more than decoys. They held my walking around money, the basic funds I used for daily expenses and utility bills. It was a comfortable sum, but it was merely the superficial crust of my actual net worth. My true financial empire was buried deep beneath layers of corporate camouflage. 3 years ago, I established a blind limited liability company named Apex Ventures. I funneled the vast majority of my consulting bonuses, my stock dividends, and my private equity returns directly into that anonymous corporate vehicle. Apex Ventures held millions of dollars in untraceable liquid capital, safely insulated from any personal legal vulnerabilities. The forged medical power of attorney was utterly useless against a corporate entity Thomas did not even know existed. I did not freeze the decoy accounts. I did not call the bank fraud department to stop the wire transfers. In the world of risk analysis, interrupting a hostile maneuver too early allows the enemy to retreat and regroup. I needed Thomas to feel invincible. I needed him to believe his forged documents were bulletproof. Every single unauthorized transaction he executed using that fake power of attorney was another separate count of federal wire fraud. He was meticulously documenting his own journey to a federal penitentiary, and I was more than happy to let him keep building his own cage. I logged out of the hospital tablet, wiping the browser history clean to protect my digital footprint. I handed the device back to the nurse when she returned, thanking her for the assistance. I sat in the quiet hospital room, formulating the exact sequence of my retaliation. I needed to reclaim my stolen phone. I needed to secure my newly built home before Julian moved his stolen belongings across the threshold. I was calculating the logistics of hiring a private security firm when the sterile silence of the hallway was broken. Heavy footsteps approached my room, moving with a fast, determined rhythm. I tensed my muscles, preparing for Thomas to walk through the door to finish the job he started in the ballroom. He knew I would eventually wake up, and he needed to silence me before I could report the assault to the police. The brass doorknob turned slowly. The hinges creaked as the heavy door was pushed inward. A long, dark shadow fell across the linoleum floor. I held my breath, gripping the edge of the metal bed rail, ready to fight back with whatever strength I had left. The heavy wooden door pushed inward, causing the metal hinges to groan. I gripped the cold steel rail of the hospital bed, bracing for a physical confrontation. I expected my father to walk through the frame, ready to finish the assault he started in the hotel ballroom. Instead, the shadow shifting across the sterile linoleum floor belonged to someone else. Maya stepped into the room. The pristine white lace and silk tulle of her bridal gown were gone. She had swapped the wedding attire for a razor-sharp, charcoal-tailored suit. Her posture radiated lethal efficiency. She did not carry the demeanor of a heartbroken bride left at the altar. She looked like a corporate executioner, arriving for a hostile negotiation. She pushed the heavy door shut and immediately twisted the deadbolt, locking us inside. She moved to the window, pulling the blinds tight to block out the glow of the street lamps outside. Without offering a greeting, she walked to the edge of my bed and dropped a sleek black mobile device onto the mattress. "I brought you a secure burner phone." Maya stated, her voice a low, steady hum. "Your father took your device. He also took your house keys." I saw him slip them into his tuxedo pocket while the paramedics were loading you onto the stretcher. He thinks he neutralized his biggest threat. I released my grip on the bed rail, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. "You did not come here just to deliver a phone, Maya. You already humiliated him in front of the Miami elite. You exposed the stolen credit cards and ended the marriage before the ink dried on the certificate. You could have boarded a flight back home and left this mess behind." Maya pulled a vinyl chair close to the bed and sat down. Her dark eyes locked onto mine, burning with an intense, chilling fury. "I cannot leave," she replied. "Julian did not just use stolen credit cards to fund a luxury wedding. He engineered a fatal financial trap, and he tied the noose directly around my neck." I sat up, ignoring the dull throb radiating from my stitches. "Tell me what he did." As a compliance director, Maya had spent years auditing corporate structures to ensure federal regulatory adherence. She knew how to spot forged credentials and shell companies. But Julian had exploited her blind spot. He used the intimacy of their relationship to access her private files. 3 months ago, Julian asked for my social security number and my primary identification documents. Maya explained, her tone clinical and detached. He claimed he was setting up a joint investment portfolio for our future. I trusted him. Instead, he used my credentials to secure a large venture capital loan for his artificial intelligence startup. He forged my signature on the guarantor forms. He listed me as the primary fiduciary officer of the company. My mind processed the data instantly. How much did he borrow, I asked. $3 million, Maya answered. The weight of the theft hung in the quiet hospital room. Julian had not just funded a fake lifestyle. He had secured millions in high-risk venture capital under the guise of a legitimate tech enterprise. The startup is a ghost entity, Maya continued. There is no software. There is no engineering team. He fabricated the revenue projections and used my flawless credit history to bypass the underwriter scrutiny. The loan requires a hefty quarterly interest payment. If that shell company defaults, the creditors will not chase Julian. They will come directly after me. The federal authorities will view me as the architect of the fraud because my name is on the legal charter. Julian planned to use me as his human shield when the empire finally collapsed. He was going to let you go to prison, I summarized, seeing the sociopathic depth of my brother and his deceit. Maya nodded slowly. He thought I would be too blinded by the wedding ring to notice the incoming audit. He underestimated my profession. I pulled the preliminary compliance reports this morning before the ceremony. That is when I found the forged loan documents. 2 women betrayed by the exact same men sitting in a sterile hospital room. My father had fractured my skull to steal my real estate. My brother had stolen the identity of his bride to secure $3 million. They operated under the arrogant assumption that we would simply absorb the damage and protect their fragile egos. They made a catastrophic miscalculation. I need your help, Harper, Maya said, leaning forward. I possess all the legal compliance documents. I have the signed loan agreements, the routing numbers, and the corporate charters. But I cannot trace the digital movement of the capital. Julian bounced the $3 million through a maze of offshore gateways. I need your risk analysis skills. I need you to follow the money and prove he orchestrated the fraud. We have to dismantle the shell company before the creditors trigger the acceleration clause. I reached for the burner phone on the bed. A standard phone was not enough to execute a forensic digital audit. Did you bring a terminal? I asked. Maya reached into her leather tote bag and pulled out a high-performance encrypted laptop. I procured this from my office. She confirmed, setting the device on my lap. The network drives are scrubbed. It is untraceable. The hospital bed transformed into a command center. I flipped the laptop open, the screen casting a pale blue light across the dark room. I bypassed the standard hospital wireless network, utilizing a secure mobile hotspot to mask our geographic location. Where do we start? Maya asked, pulling a stack of printed financial ledgers from her bag. We start at my house, I replied, typing a rapid sequence of commands into the terminal interface. Thomas stole my keys because he needed a safe harbor. His social reputation is ruined. The police will be looking for him regarding the assault. Julian needs a place to hide from the angry vendors and the venture capital creditors. My $500,000 property is sitting empty in the suburbs. It is the perfect fortress for 2 desperate fugitives. You think they are hiding at your estate? Maya asked. I know they are, I said. But they forgot one crucial detail. I built that house from scratch. I designed the architectural layout and I engineered the smart home network. I installed the security matrix myself. Thomas and Julian believed they had stolen a quiet, safe sanctuary. They had no idea they walked into a digital panopticon. When I wired the property, I embedded silent backdoors into the primary router. I could access the internal network from anywhere in the world without triggering a single security alert. My fingers danced across the keyboard, executing the penetration script. The code bypassed the exterior firewalls and linked directly to the central hub of my house. Within seconds, the network acknowledged my administrative credentials. I opened the surveillance dashboard. A grid of high-definition camera feeds populated the screen. The lenses were hidden in smoke detectors and air vents, offering unobstructed views of every room. Maya leaned closer to the monitor, her breathing steady. The living room feed showed exactly what I had predicted. Thomas and Julian were sitting on my custom leather sofa. Thomas had discarded his tuxedo jacket. He held a glass of my expensive red wine pacing the floor, while barking angry instructions at Julian. My brother sat hunched over the glass coffee table, staring frantically at his own laptop screen. They looked stressed but arrogant. They were drinking my wine and planning their next move entirely oblivious to the fact that we were watching their every breath. He is logged into the local wireless network. I noted highlighting a specific data packet routing through the system. Julian is using my internet connection to access his servers. Can you intercept his traffic? Maya asked. I do not need to intercept it, I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. He is operating on a network I own. I can mirror his entire desktop directly to this screen. I deployed a packet sniffer protocol isolating the specific device Julian was using. The program ripped through his superficial security layers, extracting the raw data pouring from his screen. I opened a secondary window on my monitor, bringing his digital workspace into crystal clear focus. We needed to find out exactly where the $3 million went. I expected to see standard offshore tax havens or expensive luxury purchases. I expected a trail of generic corporate greed. Instead, the financial architecture loading on the screen made my blood run cold. Julian was not just hiding the venture capital loan in an offshore account. He was actively managing a sprawling digital ledger filled with hundreds of individual investor names. The spreadsheet documented a relentless cycle of incoming deposits and outgoing partial payments. He is paying old investors with the new capital, Maya whispered, her voice dropping to a horrified pitch as her trained eyes recognized the mathematical pattern. It is a Ponzi scheme, I confirmed, watching the numbers update in real time. He did not just defraud one venture capital firm. He has been running a fraudulent investment ring for years. But the source of the initial seed money was the most terrifying detail. I traced the routing codes attached to his largest outstanding debt. The lender was not a traditional bank. The funds originated from a shadow syndicate based out of Chicago. These were not corporate executives who filed lawsuits when loans defaulted. They were ruthless operators who dealt in extortion and physical violence. Julian owed $3 million to a predatory syndicate, and the ledger showed he had missed his last 2 payments. The interest was compounding at a lethal rate. He is out of cash, I said, watching Julian frantically try to shift funds between empty accounts. The syndicate is going to collect their debt, and they know exactly where he is right now. The camera feed showed Julian slamming his fists against the coffee table, his face pale with raw panic. He picked up his phone, pacing the room. We watched him realize the fatal depth of his own trap. He was confined in my house, and the predators were already closing in. The pale light from the laptop screen cast sharp shadows across the sterile hospital room. I sat propped against the stiff pillows, my fingers flying across the keyboard while Maya stood over my shoulder. The digital packet sniffer had successfully pierced the superficial firewalls of Julian's operating system. Through the secure network tunnel, we effectively owned his machine. But before diving into the raw financial data, I shifted my focus to the live surveillance feed broadcasting from my living room. The high-definition camera mounted inside the ceiling smoke detector offered an unobstructed view of the men who had just betrayed us. Thomas and Julian were standing near my custom marble kitchen island. My father had removed his formal tuxedo jacket, tossing it carelessly over one of my expensive velvet bar stools. He walked over to the climate-controlled wine fridge, inspecting the bottles with the entitlement of a conqueror evaluating his spoils. He selected a rare vintage Cabernet, a bottle I had purchased to celebrate a successful corporate audit, and retrieved a corkscrew from a drawer he had no right to open. Through the hidden audio microphones, their conversation filtered clearly into the quiet hospital room. She will sign the transfer papers by tomorrow morning, Thomas stated, pouring the dark red liquid into 2 crystal glasses. He handed one to his son, his tone dripping with profound arrogance. A concussion will soften her stubborn streak. Your sister always needed a firm hand to remind her of her actual place in the hierarchy. You just focus on getting the deed recorded. Julian took the glass, his hands trembling slightly. His complexion remained an unhealthy shade of pale, contrasting sharply with his tailored formal wear. He took a long gulp of the wine, pacing the length of the hardwood floor. Are you sure the hospital will not call the police? Julian asked, his voice tight with raw anxiety. If Harper files a formal assault report, the authorities will drag both of us into an interrogation room. We cannot afford a criminal investigation right now. Dad, I need clean public records to finalize the collateral transfer. She will not call the authorities. Thomas scoffed, taking a leisurely sip. She cares too much about the family reputation. I have managed her psychological profile for 3 decades. She will absorb the damage, play the victim, and eventually yield. She always does. Maya let out a harsh, cynical breath beside me. Her eyes remained locked on the monitor, absorbing the sheer sociopathic detachment of the man she had almost called her father-in-law. They truly believe they are untouchable, she whispered, her voice a lethal mixture of disgust and awe. They are standing in your home, drinking your wine, and treating your fractured skull as a convenient negotiation tactic. They operate on the assumption of my permanent submission, I replied, my focus returning to the terminal window. Let them enjoy the vintage. It is the last comfortable drink they will ever consume. I minimized the video feed, keeping the audio running in the background, and expanded the directory tree I had just extracted from Julian's laptop. As a venture capital risk analyst, my daily routine involves dissecting complex tech startups. I locate the engineering repositories, evaluate the machine learning models, and audit the source code to verify a company's actual market valuation. Julian claimed his enterprise was building revolutionary artificial intelligence software. I searched his hard drive for development environments, beta testing logs, and algorithm architectures. I found nothing. The digital landscape of his supposed tech empire was a barren wasteland. There were no engineering files. There was no proprietary software. Instead, the hidden folders contained an intricate labyrinth of encrypted spreadsheets and decentralized cryptocurrency wallet addresses. I launched a decryption script, breaking through his amateur security protocols in under 2 minutes. The raw financial ledgers populated my screen, revealing the true nature of his operation. This is not a technology company, I stated, my eyes scanning the endless rows of incoming and outgoing capital. Maya leaned closer, her expertise as a compliance director immediately recognizing the toxic mathematical patterns. He is operating a classic Ponzi scheme, Maya concluded, her breath catching in her throat as the realization settled over her. Look at the return distributions. He is using fresh deposits from recent investors to pay the monthly dividends promised to the initial backers. He never developed a single product. He simply fabricated the profit margins and hid the capital in crypto exchanges to avoid federal banking oversight. The scope of his deception was breathtaking. Julian had spent years playing the role of a brilliant Silicon Valley visionary, courting wealthy connections at country clubs and leveraging our family name to solicit investments. But the ledgers showed the inevitable collapse of the pyramid. The influx of new investors had dried up 3 months ago. Without fresh capital, he could not pay the promised returns. The fraudulent structure was actively imploding. I isolated the primary debt column, searching for the $3 million loan he had secured using Maya's stolen credentials. The search query hit a match, pulling up a scanned promissory note. I read the lender information, and a distinct chill rushed down my spine. He did not borrow the initial seed money from a legitimate venture capital firm, I said, pointing to the creditor listed on the digital contract. He borrowed it from a shadow syndicate based in Chicago. Maya frowned, her brow furrowing as she analyzed the document. I do not recognize the entity name. Is it an unregulated private equity group? It is much worse, I explained, my voice dropping to a somber pitch. I have tracked this specific entity during previous corporate audits. They operate under the guise of an investment group, but they are a highly organized criminal syndicate. They target desperate founders who cannot secure traditional bank loans. They provide fast liquidity, but their enforcement methods do not involve filing civil lawsuits. They send collectors who utilize physical intimidation to extract their payments. I scrolled down to the covenant section of the contract. The terms were suicidal. Julian had agreed to a crushing interest rate of 40% compounded monthly. It was a mathematical death sentence. The ledger confirmed my darkest suspicion. He had missed the last 2 payments. The syndicate was penalizing him daily, and the outstanding balance was ballooning out of control. This explains the entire wedding spectacle. I deduced, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together with terrifying clarity. Julian did not want my house because he planned to live there with you, Maya. He does not care about suburban domesticity. He needed a hard, tangible asset with 0 encumbrances. A $500,000 property provides the exact collateral required to secure a fast, unregulated bridge loan. He was going to mortgage my home, Maya whispered, the horror of the revelation washing over her face. He was going to extort the deed from you, flip the property into a high-interest collateralized loan, and use the cash to pay off the Chicago syndicate before they sent enforcers to break his legs. He needed to feed the wolves. I confirmed, and he was willing to sacrifice both of our lives to purchase his own survival. Through the audio feed still transmitting from my living room, a sharp, buzzing ringtone pierced the quiet atmosphere. On the hidden camera monitor, I watched Julian yank his phone from his pocket. He stared at the caller identification, his face draining of all remaining color. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of the gallows. He answered the call, bringing the device to his ear with trembling fingers. We could not hear the voice on the other end, but Julian's reaction told the entire story. His knees buckled slightly. He gripped the edge of the marble island to keep himself upright. I understand. Julian stammered into the receiver, his voice tight and breathless with profound terror. I have the asset secured. I will have the notarized deed transferred by tomorrow afternoon. I promise you. Just give me 24 hours. Do not send anyone to the hotel. I have the money. He ended the call, dropping the phone onto the counter as if the device burned his skin. Thomas looked at his son, sensing the escalating danger. Who was that? Thomas demanded. It was the primary investor. Julian choked out, wiping a layer of cold sweat from his forehead. They are out of patience. If I do not wire the collateral by tomorrow evening, they are going to execute the default penalty. We have to go to the hospital right now. We have to force Harper to sign the quitclaim deed today. If she refuses, I am dead. Thomas nodded, his expression hardening into a mask of ruthless determination. He reached for his tuxedo jacket. We will tell her the doctors found a severe brain bleed. We will claim the paperwork is a standard medical liability release. She will be too disoriented to read the fine print. Maya stepped back from the hospital bed, her hands clenching into tight fists. They are coming here, she warned, her eyes darting toward the locked door of my room. They are going to corner you while you are injured and trick you into signing away the property. If we call the police, Julian will go to prison. But the syndicate will still hold me legally responsible for the $3 million fraudulent loan. They will hunt me down to collect his debt. We are trapped. I looked at the glowing terminal screen, analyzing the complex web of toxic debt and criminal liability Julian had engineered. A conventional defense would ruin Maya and leave me vulnerable to endless legal battles. I needed a strategy that protected the innocent and funneled the predators directly into a cage of their own making. We are not trapped, I stated, a cold, calculating energy, replacing the physical pain in my skull. I closed the laptop screen, severing the connection to the surveillance feed. We are going to let them walk through that door. We are going to smile, play the perfect victims, and give them exactly what they want. Maya stared at me, searching my face for any sign of a concussion-induced delusion. You want to surrender the house? You want to hand a $500,000 property to a man who just scammed me? I do not want to surrender it, I replied, lowering my voice to a sharp, tactical whisper. I want to build a Trojan horse. Julian needs the deed to absorb his commercial liabilities. In corporate risk management, When an entity assumes ownership of an asset, they automatically inherit the legal obligations attached to that specific address. I know exactly how to alter the transfer documents. We are going to hand Julian the keys. And in doing so, we are going to legally bind him to a fate far worse than the Chicago syndicate. You want to hand him the deed to a $500,000 asset. Maya repeated the words slowly. She stood near the foot of my hospital bed, holding the encrypted laptop against her chest. Her dark eyes narrowed as her sharp legal mind tried to process my sudden shift in strategy. Harper, he is running a fraudulent investment ring. He stole my identity to secure a venture capital loan. If you give him your real estate, he will leverage the equity to pay off his syndicate enforcers. You are funding a criminal. I adjusted the pillows behind my aching head. The stitches on my temple throbbed with a dull, steady rhythm, but my thoughts were pristine. I looked at the woman who had ripped off her bridal veil just hours ago to save me from further humiliation. I am not funding him, Maya. I am building a cage, I explained, keeping my voice to a hushed, tactical pitch. If we dial emergency services right now and dispatch the police to my house, Julian will be arrested for fraud. The Chicago syndicate will realize their primary debtor is sitting in a county jail cell, unable to generate revenue. They will instantly pivot their collection efforts toward the only other name on the loan documents. They will come looking for you. Maya swallowed hard. Her grip on the laptop tightened. The reality of the Shadow Syndicate turning their crosshairs on her was a chilling prospect. A police raid isolates Julian, but it leaves you standing in the open, I continued. We need a buffer. We must construct a scenario where Julian believes he won, so he stays highly visible and distracted. We need him holding a ticking device, while we quietly lock the exit doors. How does giving him a house accomplish that? She asked, taking a cautious step closer to the bed. In the realm of corporate acquisitions, properties are rarely just physical structures. They are legal vehicles. I reached for the burner phone resting on the thin blanket. I am going to execute a quitclaim deed. It is a legal instrument that transfers interest in a property without providing any warranties of clear title. It is the fastest method to hand over real estate. But I am going to attach a very specific rider to the transfer contract. I unlocked the burner phone and dialed a specialized contact from my professional network. The man on the other end was Marcus Thorne. He was my retaining corporate counsel, a high-tier litigator who engineered complex venture capital mergers for my firm. He answered the line with crisp efficiency. Marcus, we are executing an emergency asset transfer today, I stated, skipping the pleasantries. I need a quitclaim deed drafted for my suburban residence. The grantee is my brother Julian, but the document requires a specialized covenant buried in the liability section. I heard the distinct clack of his mechanical keyboard as he prepped a new file. Detail the covenant Marcus requested. The recipient of this deed must legally assume any and all commercial financial obligations, business operating debts, and corporate liabilities currently registered to this physical domicile, I instructed. Make the language dense. Bury it on the 4th page under standard indemnification clauses. Ensure it explicitly states the grantee waives all rights to retroactive dispute regarding these attached liabilities. Marcus paused his typing. Harper transferring a hard asset with an open-ended liability assumption is highly irregular. No competent lawyer would ever let their client sign a blind covenant like that. They would demand a full title search and a forensic audit of the address first. Julian is not going to hire a competent lawyer, I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. He is currently hiding in my living room, sweating through his tuxedo because an illegal syndicate is threatening his life. He needs collateral before sunset. He is operating purely on blind desperation and monumental greed. He will not read the fine print if the cover page offers him salvation. To sell the illusion, we need to feed their immense ego, I explained, outlining the psychological trap. You are going to call my father, Thomas. You will inform him that I sustained a traumatic brain injury during the assault. Tell him I am experiencing severe cognitive fatigue and a profound emotional collapse. Tell him I refuse to endure a messy public trial. I will decline to press felony charges for the physical strike provided. Julian accepts the house, and they leave me alone. Marcus let out a low breath of understanding. You want me to present the real estate as a surrender treaty. You want them to think they bullied you into submission. They need to believe they crushed the black sheep of the family, I confirmed. Make them feel invincible, Marcus. I kept the phone on speaker and muted my microphone. Maya sat on the edge of the vinyl visitor chair, listening intently as Marcus initiated the call to my father. The line rang twice before Thomas answered. His voice echoed through the hospital room, carrying a thick layer of defensive hostility. Mr. Montgomery, I am Marcus Thorne, retaining counsel for your daughter Harper. I am contacting you regarding the unfortunate altercation that occurred at the reception earlier this evening. There was no altercation, Thomas snapped, his tone radiating defensive arrogance. My daughter suffered a momentary lapse in judgment and tripped. If she is trying to extort a settlement, she will find my legal team quite formidable. Marcus executed his role flawlessly. He adopted a soothing, placating rhythm. There will be no litigation, sir. Harper sustained a concussion and is currently suffering from profound emotional distress. She lacks the stamina for a protracted legal dispute. She simply wants peace. My client is prepared to sign a quitclaim deed transferring the suburban property to Julian today. In exchange, she requires a signed non-prosecution agreement, ensuring no criminal assault charges are filed regarding her head injury. She is offering a total surrender. A heavy silence fell over the line. Maya and I exchanged a sharp glance. We could practically hear the gears turning in my father's mind. He was weighing the prospect of an assault investigation against the immediate acquisition of a $500,000 asset. His overwhelming greed predictably eclipsed his caution. She always was too fragile for the real world. Thomas scoffed, a sickening wave of triumph washing over his words. Send the paperwork to her residential address. Julian and I are currently inspecting the property. We will sign the agreement and conclude this unfortunate family drama. Marcus ended the call. The execution phase was officially in motion. Less than 2 hours later, a licensed mobile notary arrived at my property. Through the backdoor access I had established on the home security network, Maya and I watched the final transaction unfold on the laptop screen. The hidden camera in the living room captured the notary placing the thick stack of premium legal paper onto the marble kitchen island. Julian stood over the documents, his eyes darting frantically across the cover page. He was visibly shaking his posture, ruined by the looming threat of his unpaid syndicate debt. Thomas stood beside him, holding a gold fountain pen projecting the aura of a victorious patriarch. Read the signature lines Julian Thomas instructed, pointing to the bottom of the first page. Just verify her name is on the relinquishment. Julian did not request time to review the covenants. He did not hire an independent auditor to scan for hidden clauses. He bypassed the intricate indemnification paragraphs on page 4 entirely. His eyes remained locked on the single line that granted him immense equity. He snatched the gold pen from his father. The ink flowed across the crisp paper. He signed his name with a rapid, erratic motion, binding himself to the contract. Thomas stepped forward and countersigned the non-disclosure agreement, solidifying his own escape from criminal prosecution. They handed the documents back to the notary, offering arrogant smiles. They popped a fresh bottle of my champagne the moment the notary walked out the front door. Thomas raised his glass, celebrating his tactical supremacy. Julian let out a ragged breath of relief, believing he finally secured the leverage required to pay off his lethal creditors. They rejoiced in my supposed defeat, unaware of the toxic structure they just inherited. Maya watched the screen, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. He actually signed it, she murmured, shaking her head in sheer disbelief. He assumed legal responsibility for a property without checking the fine print. He took the bait I confirmed, reaching for the burner phone to initiate my next sequence. He legally accepted any commercial financial obligations tethered to that specific address. But there are no corporate liabilities attached to your house. Maya noted, her brow furrowing in confusion. You built that property with your own clean capital. The deed is unencumbered. What exactly did he inherit? I looked at the former bride, offering a sharp, predatory gaze. He inherited an empty vessel, Maya. He opened his front door and signed a blank check. Now it is my turn to fill that vessel with explosives. I disconnected from the surveillance feed and opened my secure financial portal. Julian thought he bought himself a lifeline. He did not realize his signature just granted me the legal authorization to merge his life with a catastrophic debt. The house was no longer a suburban sanctuary. It was the staging ground for a lethal financial acquisition. The soft glow of the laptop illuminated the sterile hospital room walls. On the surveillance feed, Julian sat on the edge of my custom kitchen island, holding his smartphone high to catch the perfect overhead angle. He posed with a crystal glass of my vintage wine, a smug grin plastered across his face. He tapped the glass screen a few times, and a moment later, a notification chimed on the device Maya held in her hands. She opened the social media application and turned the screen toward me. Julian had just uploaded a photograph of himself lounging in my home. The caption underneath the image read, "Securing the foundation for the next big chapter." He was broadcasting his unearned victory to his network of fake investors, projecting an aura of immense success. He needed the public validation to maintain the fragile illusion of his wealth. The irony tasted richer than the wine he was currently stealing. He was celebrating the acquisition of a stolen house while simultaneously drowning in millions of dollars of toxic debt to lethal creditors. He believed he had outsmarted his sister and secured a tangible asset to leverage his way out of a death sentence. I turned my attention away from his pathetic digital performance and focused on the real financial battlefield. To execute a lethal corporate takedown, you never use your own name. You operate behind thick, impenetrable layers of legal insulation. Years ago, I established Apex Ventures. It functioned as a blind holding entity registered in Delaware, shielding my private equity returns from public scrutiny. My name appeared nowhere on the state incorporation documents or the operating agreements. On paper, Apex Ventures was a faceless corporate ghost managed by an anonymous proxy board. That ghost was about to swallow my brother whole. I picked up the secure burner phone and dialed a specialized contact operating out of a high-rise in Manhattan. Silas Vance was a distressed debt broker. He worked in the murky gray area of high finance, where toxic loans, uncollectible promissory notes, and defaulted commercial paper were traded like cheap commodities. Silas wore bespoke suits and possessed the moral compass of a starving shark. He thrived on acquiring terrible debt from desperate lenders and squeezing the debtors for maximum profit. He answered the encrypted line before the second ring finished. "Harper," he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum of perpetual business. "It is late on a Friday. Tell me you have a lucrative disaster for me to clean up." "I need you to act as a proxy buyer for Apex Ventures," I stated, keeping my tone brisk and unyielding. "We are acquiring a highly distressed promissory note today. The debtor is a fraudulent artificial intelligence startup based in Miami. The original principal is $3 million. The current holders are a shadow syndicate operating out of Chicago." Silas let out a sharp whistle. "You are playing in the deep end of the pool tonight. That Chicago outfit does not file civil lawsuits when their clients default. They send collectors with baseball bats. Why would Apex Ventures want to buy paper from a criminal syndicate? Because the debtor is backed into a corner and the syndicate knows it," I explained. "The startup is a hollow shell running a failing Ponzi scheme. The founder has missed 2 consecutive payments, and the interest is compounding at 40% a month. The Chicago lenders are businessmen first. They know the debtor is out of liquid cash. If they send enforcers to break his legs, they draw unwanted federal attention, and they still do not get their money back. They are staring at a total loss." Silas understood the mechanics of the trade instantly. "They want an exit strategy," he concluded. "They want fast, untraceable liquidity rather than a messy physical collection process." "Exactly," I said. "Contact their primary handler. Offer them a clean, quiet way out. Tell them an anonymous private equity firm is willing to assume the collection risk. Offer them $800,000 in immediate cash for the entire $3 million debt portfolio." $800,000 is a steep discount. Silas noted his fingers clicking rapidly across a mechanical keyboard as he pulled up the syndicate contact protocols. They will counteroffer. They always do. Do not negotiate, I order. Tell them the offer expires in exactly 1 hour. The debtor is currently facing imminent federal exposure for wire fraud and identity theft. If the Chicago outfit holds on to the note when the authorities raid the startup, the federal government will seize the remaining assets, and the syndicate will be dragged into a federal money laundering investigation. Remind them that $800,000 today is vastly superior to a federal subpoena tomorrow. Consider it done, Silas promised. I will wire the purchase agreement to your secure inbox the moment they accept the terms. I ended the call and set the phone down on the thin hospital blanket. Maya stared at me, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of profound shock and deep respect. She was a compliance director, accustomed to navigating strict regulatory frameworks. Watching a risk analyst orchestrate a shadow acquisition of criminal debt was entirely outside her standard operating procedures. "You just bought his debt," Maya whispered, shaking her head slowly. "You paid $800,000 to own the very loan he used my stolen identity to secure. Why would you spend your own clean capital to buy a toxic loan?" I looked at the surveillance monitor where Julian was currently pouring himself another glass of my wine. "Because owning the debt means holding the leash," I replied, a cold smile forming on my lips. In the financial sector, the primary creditor controls the ultimate fate of the debtor. The Chicago syndicate wanted their money back. "I do not care about the money, Maya. I care about the leverage." I opened the digital copy of the quitclaim deed Julian had signed just 2 hours prior. I highlighted the dense legal covenant buried on the 4th page. Julian was so desperate to acquire this house that he signed an open-ended assumption of commercial liability. I explained, tracing the text with my finger. He legally tethered his business debts to the physical address of the property. When the notary stamped that document, the house became the primary collateral for his tech startup. The realization hit Maya like a physical blow. Her posture straightened as the sheer brilliance of the legal trap settled into her mind. "He offered the house as collateral to a company that you now secretly control," she deduced, her voice trembling with the thrill of the incoming victory. "He signed away his future to escape the syndicate, but he just handed the executioner's sword directly to you." "Exactly," I confirmed. "Apex Ventures is now the sole legal creditor for his $3 million obligation. I have the legal authority to freeze his bank accounts, seize his physical assets, and execute an immediate foreclosure on the property he thinks he just conquered. He is sitting on my couch, believing he won the war. He has no idea the person holding his entire financial existence in the palm of her hand is the sister he left bleeding on a hotel floor." My encrypted laptop chimed with an incoming priority email. I opened the message from Silas Vance. Attached was a digitally verified assignment of debt contract. The Chicago syndicate had recognized the closing window of opportunity and accepted the cash offer without a single counter-proposal. They transferred the promissory note, the fraudulent guarantor forms, and all collection rights to Apex Ventures. The transaction was closed. The digital ink was dry. I was officially the owner of Julian and his entire fake empire. "We have the leverage to crush him," Maya said, her eyes gleaming with fierce determination. "We can trigger the default clause tomorrow morning and throw him out onto the street. We can hand the forged loan documents to the authorities and clear my name." "We will clear your name," I promised, closing the debt portfolio folder. But Julian is only one piece of the rot infecting this family. He did not build this delusion alone. Thomas and Evelyn enabled his extravagant lifestyle for years. They funded his designer wardrobe, his luxury vehicles, and his country club memberships, while fully knowing his startup generated zero revenue. Maya nodded, pulling her own encrypted tablet from her leather tote bag. She opened a series of dense financial spreadsheets containing the compliance records she had smuggled out of her shared home office. "You are right, Harper. Julian could never sustain a Ponzi scheme of this magnitude without a steady influx of external capital to cover his operating expenses. She turned the tablet toward me, displaying a complex flow of incoming wire transfers hitting Julian corporate accounts over the past 36 months. Look at the origin routing numbers, Maya instructed, tapping the screen. These deposits did not come from retail investors or naive friends. These are massive six-figure injections of pure cash. I studied the routing data. The originating bank belonged to the commercial real estate firm, where my father served as the executive director. Thomas managed a sprawling portfolio of commercial properties across the state, handling millions of dollars in tenant deposits and employee pension contributions. Is Thomas funneling company profits into Julian fake startup? I asked my professional instincts, immediately detecting the scent of a severe federal violation. It is much darker than simple embezzlement. Maya replied, her face hardening into a mask of pure disgust. I ran a cross-reference on the specific escrow accounts Thomas utilized for these transfers. These are not operational profits. Thomas and Evelyn have been systematically draining the employee pension fund. They stole the retirement savings of their own administrative staff, their maintenance crews, and their junior brokers to finance Julian fraudulent illusion. The scope of their depravity was staggering. My parents had stolen millions of dollars from hardworking employees who trusted Thomas with their future security. They jeopardized the livelihoods of innocent families just to ensure their golden son could parade around Miami pretending to be a tech visionary. They are operating a criminal syndicate disguised as a wealthy suburban family. I said the raw reality of their actions, eradicating any lingering trace of familial loyalty I might have harbored. They stole $5 million from a federal pension fund. That is a mandatory federal prison sentence. If we report this to the authorities, the federal government will seize everything Maya warned. The Internal Revenue Service and the Securities and Exchange Commission will dismantle Thomas' real estate firm. They will freeze Evelyn personal accounts. They will lose their country club memberships, their luxury vehicles, and their freedom. I looked back at the surveillance monitor. Thomas was laughing at something Julian said, raising his crystal wine glass in a triumphant toast. They were celebrating their perceived dominance, entirely blind to the catastrophic storm gathering directly above their heads. They thought they had secured their legacy by shedding the disappointing daughter. They wanted a high-stakes corporate game, I whispered, a cold, unrelenting resolve locking into place. We are going to give them a total financial slaughter. Maya opened a secure communication portal connecting directly to the whistleblower division of the Internal Revenue Service. She began compiling the digital evidence, attaching the forged loan documents, the cryptocurrency ledgers, and the pension fund transfer receipts. The federal tripwire was being laid across their doorstep. We just needed the perfect moment to force them to step on it. The blue light of the monitor reflected in Maya's dark eyes. She reached into the lining of her leather tote bag and retrieved a silver encrypted flash drive. While Julian was busy admiring his stolen house, she had been securing the ultimate insurance policy. As a compliance director, she possessed unrestricted access to the internal financial audits of her former fiancé enterprise, but she also demanded transparency from his investors. That meant she held the consolidated tax returns for Thomas and his real estate firm. She plugged the drive into my terminal. The decryption software hummed, parsing through layers of password protection. Folders began to populate the screen, revealing decades of financial history. I cracked my knuckles, letting my risk analyst training take the wheel. We were no longer simply looking at a failed startup. We were dissecting a generational crime syndicate. I opened the primary ledger for the commercial real estate brokerage, where my father served as executive director. On the surface, the balance sheets projected an image of robust health. The quarterly revenues aligned with industry standards. The operational expenses appeared normal, but forensic accounting relies on finding the anomalies hidden in plain sight. I ran a cross-verification script matching the outgoing corporate disbursements against the incoming deposits in Julian's shadow accounts. The software flagged an anomaly within 30 seconds. I zoomed in on a specific routing sequence. The numbers did not originate from the general operating fund. They were being siphoned directly from a restricted employee pension trust. My stomach turned cold. Thomas was not just embezzling surplus profits. He was systematically draining the retirement savings of his own workforce. Look at the disbursement dates I instructed, pointing to the glowing rows of data. Every time Julian missed a payment to the Chicago syndicate, a corresponding withdrawal hit the employee pension fund. Thomas authorized emergency transfers, classifying them as high-yield commercial investments. Maya leaned over the keyboard, her jaw clenched tight. He diverted the capital into shell companies registered under Evelyn. Name Maya. Noted tracing the digital breadcrumbs. Evelyn acted as the laundry machine. She funneled the stolen pensions through her luxury consulting business, washing the funds before injecting them into Julian cryptocurrency wallets as clean venture capital. The total deficit glared at us from the bottom of the spreadsheet. $5 million. My parents had erased the futures of their administrative staff, their maintenance crews, and their junior brokers. People who trusted Thomas with their livelihoods were now destined to retire into poverty. And my mother, the woman who constantly criticized my practical wardrobe, used a portion of that stolen money to maintain her pristine country club memberships and purchase designer handbags. Just foreclosing on the house is not a sufficient penalty. I stated the realization, cementing my resolve. If I trigger the debt collection and seize the property today, Thomas and Evelyn will recognize the threat. They possess enough elite social connections to liquidate their remaining offshore assets and flee the jurisdiction. They could board a flight to a non-extradition country before the civil courts even process the foreclosure paperwork. We cannot give them an opportunity to run. We have to close every single exit, Maya agreed. Her professional demeanor hardened into something far more dangerous. Civil litigation only touches their wallets. We need to dismantle their freedom. Maya opened a new secure browser window. She navigated directly to the federal whistleblower portal for the Securities and Exchange Commission. She did not hesitate. Operating as a verified compliance officer elevated the credibility of her submission. She was not a disgruntled family member seeking petty revenge. She was a licensed corporate official reporting a confirmed structural fraud. I watched her fingers move with lethal precision. She uploaded the encrypted flash drive contents. She attached the forged loan documents, the cryptocurrency transfer logs, and the undeniable proof of the pension fund embezzlement. She detailed the exact statutes they had violated, citing specific federal regulations regarding wire fraud, identity theft, and the misappropriation of employee retirement trusts. She did not stop there. She opened a secondary portal, this one belonging to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. She submitted the identical dossier, highlighting Evelyn's role in laundering the stolen capital through fake consulting fees to evade federal taxation. The upload progress bar crawled across the screen. Each percentage point represented another nail in their collective coffin. When the bar hit 100%, a stark green confirmation number appeared. The submission was logged, timestamped, and permanently entered into the federal database. "The bomb is armed," Maya whispered, staring at the confirmation screen. "The federal automated systems will flag the $5 million discrepancy by tomorrow morning. They will assign a tactical financial unit to the case immediately." I closed the browser, erasing our digital footprints from the hospital network. The federal authorities were now moving in the shadows, quietly building their indictments. But the authorities move at their own deliberate pace. We needed to keep our targets distracted and confined to a single location until the trap snapped shut. I shifted my attention back to the surveillance feed, transmitting from my suburban home. The dynamic inside the house had shifted. Julian and Thomas were no longer alone. Evelyn had arrived. My mother swept through the front door, carrying 2 expensive leather shopping bags. She wore a vibrant silk dress, her hair perfectly styled, acting as though she had not just participated in a brutal assault on her own daughter a few hours prior. She embraced Julian, kissing his cheek, and surveying the living room with an approving nod. Through the hidden audio feed, her shrill voice echoed clearly. "The space is adequate," Evelyn announced, dropping her bags onto my kitchen island. "It lacks sophistication, but we can hire an interior designer to fix Harper dreadful taste. The important thing is that you have a tangible asset to show your investors, Julian." We need to project absolute strength right now. Thomas walked over to his wife, handing her a glass of the wine they had stolen from my cellar. I was thinking the exact same thing he agreed. We cannot afford to look weak after the spectacle Maya caused at the hotel. We need to control the narrative before those rumors spread through the financial district. Evelyn smiled a sharp, calculating expression that sent a familiar chill down my spine. Then we host a gathering, she declared. We throw a lavish housewarming party right here this Saturday night. We invite your top-tier investors, the country club board members, and the regional developers. We show them that Julian is thriving and expanding his real estate portfolio. A grand celebration will silence the whispers and buy us the time we need to stabilize the accounts. Julian looked nervous, wiping a layer of sweat from his forehead. Are you sure that is a smart move, Mom? The Chicago lenders are expecting the collateral transfer. If we throw a party, we are exposing ourselves. It is the only move. Thomas interrupted his ego, overriding his son's lingering caution. You have the deed. The property is legally yours. We leverage the house to satisfy the Chicago syndicate, and we use the party to court fresh capital. We project invincibility. I sat in the hospital bed listening to them architect their own spectacular demise. They were actively planning to fill a heavily surveilled, legally trapped property with the most influential people in their social circle. They wanted an audience to witness their triumph. They were going to get an audience to witness their absolute destruction. The doctor returned to my room shortly after holding a discharge clipboard. My scans were clear of any severe intracranial bleeding, though the concussion required strict rest. He signed my release papers, advising me to avoid stressful situations. I thanked him, accepting the paperwork with a steady hand. Maya helped me navigate out of the emergency ward, bypassing the main lobby to avoid any lingering reporters or curious acquaintances. A private black car waited at the curb, arranged by my corporate security firm. We slid into the leather seats, the tinted windows shielding us from the humid Miami night. Where to? The driver asked. I provided the address of a secure penthouse suite owned by my venture capital firm. It was an off-the-books property, impenetrable and heavily guarded. As the car merged onto the highway, my burner phone vibrated. I opened the screen. It was an automated email alert from a local catering company. Because my smart home network managed all incoming localized mail, I received a copy of the electronic invoice Evelyn had just authorized. She had booked a premium catering service, a string quartet, and an open bar for Saturday evening. She charged the $10,000 invoice to a credit card I knew was linked to the stolen employee pension fund. They are throwing the party in 48 hours, I told Maya, showing her the digital receipt. They are inviting the entire Miami elite to celebrate their victory. Maya leaned back against the headrest, a dangerous smirk playing on her lips. A housewarming party for a house they do not actually own, funded by stolen pensions, while federal agents review their tax returns. I locked the phone screen, staring out at the passing city lights. The stage was perfectly set. They wanted to project strength to the world. We were going to crash their performance and turn their luxurious celebration into a financial slaughterhouse. 72 hours after the wedding disaster, the Miami skyline glowed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of my secure penthouse. The space was a fortress of glass and steel, entirely disconnected from the suburban reality I had temporarily surrendered. I sat behind a sleek obsidian desk. My healing temple throbbed lightly beneath a fresh bandage. The physical pain was a distant background noise overshadowed by the icy precision taking over my mind. On the wide, curved monitors illuminating the dark room, my former house buzzed with sickening life. Evelyn and Thomas wasted zero time. They orchestrated a lavish housewarming party to cement Julian's fabricated success in the minds of Miami high society. Through the hidden lens integrated into the living room smoke detector, I watched 60 wealthy guests mingle on my imported hardwood floors. Waiters in crisp black uniforms circulated through the crowd, holding silver trays of champagne. I tapped the audio feed, isolating the conversations near the kitchen island. Evelyn stood near the catering manager. The event coordinator handed my mother a digital payment terminal. I zoomed the camera feed on her hands. She did not produce her own card. She swiped a silver corporate card that I instantly recognized. It was my secondary expense account. It was a decoy line of credit I kept active for emergency maintenance at the property. Thomas must have lifted it from my purse alongside the house keys during the ballroom assault. They were funding their extravagant celebration using my own stolen plastic, oblivious to the fact that I received instantaneous routing alerts for every single transaction. The catering bill processed for $12,000. The premium wine delivery tallied another $6,000. A separate charge for an expensive string quartet hit the ledger 3 minutes later. Maya stood beside my desk, holding a cup of black coffee. She watched the monitor as Evelyn smiled and signed the digital receipt. They truly lack basic survival instincts. Maya noted, her tone dripping with clinical disgust. She is committing felony theft right in front of the very people she is trying to impress. She is leaving a digital paper trail so thick a first-year law student could secure an indictment. Let them run up the tap, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on the screen. The higher the charge, the more severe the wire fraud prosecution. Every swipe of that stolen card weaves the rope a little tighter around her neck. We need them to establish a clear pattern of undocumented spending. I shifted the audio focus to the outdoor patio. Thomas was holding court with 3 prominent regional investors. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. The investors were asking about my sudden disappearance from the family dynamic. Harper is currently undergoing intensive psychiatric care. Thomas lied smoothly, projecting a tone of manufactured paternal sorrow. The stress of her isolated lifestyle finally broke her cognitive reasoning. She had a severe mental episode at the wedding reception. It was a tragedy. However, she voluntarily relinquished this estate to Julian so she could seek long-term treatment at a residential facility. We are just trying to move forward and focus on Julian expanding portfolio. The investors nodded sympathetically, praising Thomas for his strength during a family crisis. My father was systematically erasing my credibility. He was weaving a narrative that framed me as an unstable lunatic, ensuring that if I ever tried to reclaim my stolen property, the Miami elite would simply view me as a delusional patient having an episode. He was assassinating my character to build a protective shield around his sun-fraudulent empire. The sheer audacity of his lie demanded a surgical response. Thomas relied on his reputation within the commercial real estate sector to maintain power. He used his country club connections to project an aura of financial invincibility. He was standing on my patio, lying to men who trusted him with millions of dollars in capital. Those same men would soon discover that Thomas had embezzled from his own employee pension funds to sustain his son-failing Ponzi scheme. The structural collapse of his firm was already moving through federal channels thanks to the whistleblower report Maya filed. Inside the main living area, Julian tapped a silver spoon against his champagne flute. The scattered conversations died down. The guests turned their attention to the young man pretending to be a technology visionary. Julian stood near the marble fireplace, raising his glass high. He looked confident. He looked untouchable. The heavy gold watch still rested on his wrist, a beacon of stolen wealth. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, Julian announced, his voice carrying clearly through the hidden microphones. This house represents more than just a physical address. It represents a launching pad for my next artificial intelligence venture. It proves that, with relentless dedication and the support of a strong family, any obstacle can be overcome. We are building a legacy here. The wealthy crowd erupted into polite applause. Evelyn wiped a fake tear from her cheek. Thomas raised his scotch glass in proud agreement. They were basking in the glow of their stolen triumph. They thought the war was over. They thought the quiet, solitary sister had been successfully discarded into the shadows. I watched Julian smile at an investor handing the man a business card for a company that generated zero revenue. Julian was desperate to court fresh capital. He needed these attendees to write massive checks so he could avoid the lethal consequences of his debt to the Chicago syndicate. He was using my home as a theatrical stage to solicit victims for his collapsing financial pyramid. His entire physical demeanor projected false wealth, masking the crushing anxiety of a man who knew his kneecaps were on the line if he failed to produce cash. I did not feel a single trace of anger. Anger is an unpredictable emotion that clouds judgment. What I felt was the cold mechanical certainty of an executioner stepping up to the block. I placed my hands on the illuminated keyboard. The role of the passive victim officially expired. My customized financial lockdown script was fully coded-tested and waiting in the terminal window. The program was designed to sever their access to the decoy accounts, freeze the stolen credit cards, and trigger the predatory debt acceleration clauses simultaneously. I had also integrated a direct relay to the local police dispatch, sharing the exact geographic coordinates of the stolen credit card transactions occurring in real time. It was a synchronized strike, engineered to strip their resources and summon law enforcement to their front door in a single fluid motion. "Are you ready?" Maya asked, setting her coffee cup down on the obsidian desk. She crossed her arms, watching the surveillance grid with intense anticipation. She had shed her corporate compliance persona and fully embraced the role of an architect watching a controlled demolition. They believe they hold all the cards, I said, staring at Julian, triumphant face on the monitor. They think they stole a sanctuary. They have no idea they locked themselves inside a digital slaughterhouse. I aligned my cursor over the execution command. The guests on the screen were raising their glasses, drinking to Julian fake future. The atmosphere in the stolen house was saturated with arrogant joy. I pressed my finger firmly against the enter key, unleashing the silent digital avalanche that would instantly eradicate their entire world. The tactile click of the enter key echoed through the silent penthouse. On my monitor, the execution script deployed with lethal efficiency. Lines of code cascaded down the terminal window, tracking the digital requests as they hit the global banking servers. I sat back in the ergonomic leather chair and watched the live surveillance feed broadcasting from my living room. The transition from extravagant celebration to financial ruin took less than 10 seconds. Evelyn stood near the kitchen island, laughing lightly at a joke made by a prominent local developer. The catering manager, a sharp-featured man wearing a tailored uniform, stepped into her line of sight. He held a sleek wireless payment terminal, presenting it with practiced discretion. The initial deposit for the caviar, the champagne, and the waitstaff had cleared days ago, but the final balance required an authorized signature. The outstanding total was $18,000. My mother did not flinch. She reached into her designer clutch and produced the silver corporate card Thomas had stolen from my purse. She slipped the plastic into the chip reader, continuing her conversation with the developer without missing a beat. She expected the familiar chime of approval. She expected to maintain her facade of effortless wealth. The terminal emitted a harsh flat beep. The screen flashed a bright crimson error message. Evelyn paused mid-sentence. The developer raised an eyebrow, sensing the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The catering manager maintained his professional posture, but his smile grew rigid. He withdrew the card and wiped the metallic chip against his jacket, assuming a simple read error. He inserted the plastic a second time. The machine rejected it faster than before. Declined. Fraud lock active. My mother snatched the card from the manager. Her cheeks flushed a patchy, uneven pink. She let out a breathy, nervous laugh, attempting to brush off the technical failure. She claimed the bank must have flagged the large transaction for security purposes. She waved her hand, signaling for Thomas to come over and resolve the minor inconvenience. My father excused himself from a group of venture capitalists and strode confidently toward the kitchen. He listened to Evelyn whisper a hurried explanation. A look of profound annoyance crossed his face. He viewed the catering manager not as a working professional, but as an irritating obstacle. Thomas reached inside his custom suit jacket and withdrew his prestigious black card. This was the instrument he used to command respect at country clubs and elite steakhouses. It carried a limit high enough to purchase luxury vehicles outright. He tapped the heavy metal card against the terminal screen, projecting sheer, arrogant authority. He looked back toward the venture capitalists, ready to resume his pitch. The terminal glowed red. The identical harsh beep sliced through the ambient jazz music playing from the ceiling speakers. Thomas frowned, his jaw tightening. He grabbed the terminal from the manager and stared at the digital display. Insufficient funds. Account frozen by judicial order. The patriarchal confidence melted into sudden raw confusion. He reached for his wallet, pulling out a gold-tier business card linked to his commercial real estate brokerage. He shoved it into the reader. Denied. He pulled out a secondary personal credit line. Denied. Across the city, my financial architecture was functioning exactly as designed. Apex Ventures had officially triggered the acceleration clause on the $3 million promissory note Julian had blindly signed over to my address. The covenant dictated an immediate seizure of all liquid assets linked to the debtor and his registered guarantors. Simultaneous to that maneuver, the federal tripwire Maya had established struck the banking system. The Securities and Exchange Commission, partnered with the Internal Revenue Service, had slapped a total asset freeze on Thomas and his brokerage due to the $5 million pension embezzlement investigation. Every single financial artery connecting my family to the outside world was severed. They were cut off from the global economy. The catering manager dropped his polite demeanor. The deference reserved for wealthy clients vanished, replaced by the sharp protective instinct of a business owner dealing with thieves. He stepped closer to Thomas, raising his voice so the surrounding guests could hear. Sir, the manager stated, his tone cold and unyielding. Every payment method you provided is returning a federal lock code. You have consumed $18,000 in services and inventory tonight. I need a functioning wire transfer or a certified cashier check right now. If you cannot provide payment, I am instructing my staff to pack up the remaining food, and I am calling law enforcement for theft of services. The word theft hung heavily in the air. The hushed conversations near the kitchen island ceased entirely. The elite attendees, holding crystal champagne flutes, turned their heads. Miami high society operates on a currency of perception, and the perception of Thomas Montgomery was rapidly disintegrating. The developer, who had been laughing with Evelyn just minutes prior, took a deliberate step backward, physically distancing himself from the unfolding scandal. Julian stood near the marble fireplace, holding a fresh drink. He noticed the sudden drop in conversation and saw his parents cornered by the catering staff. His initial reaction was annoyance. He assumed his father was haggling over the bill, an embarrassing habit Thomas occasionally exhibited. Julian set his drink down and pulled his smartphone from his pocket, intending to transfer the funds himself to save face in front of his prospective investors. Through the surveillance camera, I watched Julian unlock his screen. Maya leaned over my desk, her eyes tracking his every movement. He opened his primary banking application. The biometric scanner read his face, and the loading wheel spun for 2 agonizing seconds. The dashboard materialized. Julian stared at the screen. The muscles in his neck seized. His checking account balance displayed a singular, devastating digit: 0. He tapped the screen, frantically navigating to his business ledgers. The shell company accounts were decimated. He opened his decentralized cryptocurrency wallets, the hidden vaults where he stored the funds he had scammed from his fake startup investors. The digital wallets were entirely empty. The emergency asset seizure initiated by Apex Ventures had swept through his digital footprint with ruthless precision, legally claiming every available cent to satisfy the defaulted toxic loan. Julian stumbled backward, his shoulders hitting the stone mantel of the fireplace. His breathing became shallow and erratic. He did not know that his sister was the architect of this ruin. In his mind, there was only one entity capable of executing a financial wipeout of this magnitude: the Chicago Shadow Syndicate. He believed the lethal creditors had finally collected their debt. He believed the men who broke bones for a living were actively dismantling his life. The sheer terror radiating from his posture was palpable even through a digital monitor. He looked around the crowded living room, his eyes wide and frantic, expecting syndicate enforcers' sides to kick through the glass patio doors at any moment. Evelyn was pleading with the catering manager, her voice cracking as she promised to resolve the bank error by morning. Thomas was red in the face, shouting at the staff, demanding they show him respect. He threatened to ruin their business, calling them incompetent fools. But his threats lacked teeth. The wealthy guests saw right through the bluster. They recognized the distinct odor of financial ruin. Several prominent regional developers quietly set their drinks down on side tables and moved toward the front hallway, retrieving their coats. They did not say goodbye. They simply evaporated, fleeing the toxic fallout before the blast radius could taint their own reputations. Julian watched his potential investors walk out the door, taking his last chance at survival with them. The catering manager had reached his limit. He pulled a cell phone from his apron pocket, holding it up for Thomas to see. "I am dialing the local precinct," he announced firmly. "You can explain your frozen accounts to the police." Thomas lunged forward, grabbing the manager's wrist. "Put the phone away," Thomas barked, panic finally fracturing his authoritative mask. "Do not make a scene in my home. We will get you the cash." The struggle over the phone drew the remaining attendees into a tight circle of shock. The lavish housewarming party had devolved into a cheap, chaotic brawl over an unpaid restaurant bill. Evelyn buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly as her pristine social identity burned to ashes. I sat in the quiet penthouse sipping my coffee, watching the digital destruction manifest into physical humiliation. The timing was flawless. The foundation of their arrogance was eradicated, leaving them exposed, terrified, and turning on each other. Before the catering manager could dial the authorities, a sharp, commanding noise reverberated through the first floor. It was a heavy metallic pounding on the solid oak front door. The sound was aggressive, rhythmic, and entirely devoid of polite hesitation. The remaining guests froze. Julian practically jumped out of his skin, his terrified mind immediately assuming the Chicago debt collectors had arrived to exact their physical penalty. Thomas released the manager's wrist, staring down the hallway toward the entryway. The pounding echoed a second time, louder and more insistent, demanding immediate entry. The digital lockdown had successfully starved them. Now the physical consequences were waiting on the front porch, ready to deliver the killing blow. The rhythmic thud against the solid oak door echoed through the silent living room. The caterer paused, his hand hovering near his phone. Julian stood frozen by the marble fireplace, his breathing shallow and rapid. In his terrified mind, the men standing on the front porch were not delivering a friendly warning. He pictured the Chicago syndicate enforcers, holding heavy steel pipes, ready to collect their overdue debt in blood. His custom tuxedo suddenly felt like a suffocating straitjacket. Thomas, desperate to reclaim his crumbling authority, pushed past the catering staff. He adjusted his silk tie, attempting to project the formidable aura of a seasoned real estate executive. He marched toward the entryway, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. He grabbed the brass handle and pulled the heavy door open, preparing to unleash a torrent of arrogant threats upon whoever dared interrupt his gathering. The figure standing on the porch did not match the profile of a syndicate enforcer. He wore a simple beige windbreaker, a faded baseball cap, and practical rubber-soled shoes. He held a thick manila envelope and a digital tablet. The man did not carry a weapon. Yet he brought a level of destruction far more devastating than any physical threat. He was a registered process server, an agent of the civil court system, tasked with delivering financial ruin. The server did not flinch at Thomas and his furious glare. He simply looked past the older man, his eyes scanning the well-dressed crowd gathered in the foyer. He spotted Julian hovering near the fireplace, identifying the young groom from a printed photograph attached to his clipboard. Without asking for permission, the server stepped over the threshold, invading the pristine sanctuary of my former home. He walked briskly across the room, ignoring the shocked gasps of the wealthy attendees. He stopped directly in front of Julian. The young man shrank back, his eyes darting toward the exits. "Julian Montgomery," the server stated, his voice a flat, bureaucratic monotone that carried no trace of empathy. "You have been served." The server thrust the heavy manila envelope forward, pressing it firmly against Julian in his chest. Julian fumbled, his uncoordinated hands failing to grasp the thick stack of papers. The envelope hit the floor, spilling crisp legal documents across the imported rug. The server raised his digital tablet, snapping a quick photograph of the fallen paperwork at Julian and his feet to secure undeniable proof of delivery. He turned on his heel and walked out the open front door, vanishing into the warm Miami night without another word. The guests stared at the scattered documents. Serving legal papers at a high society housewarming party was an unprecedented breach of social decorum. It signaled a profound, unmanageable crisis. Thomas rushed forward, his face flushed with indignation. He dropped to one knee, snatching the papers from the rug. He intended to tear them apart, to dismiss them as a clerical error or a jealous prank. But his eyes caught the bold, black lettering stamped across the header of the primary document. His hands began to tremble. The anger drained from his features, replaced by a stark, terrifying pallor. Notice of emergency foreclosure and asset seizure. Thomas read aloud, his voice reduced to a hoarse, fractured whisper. He scanned the dense legal text, his expert real estate background allowing him to translate the catastrophic jargon instantly. This is a demand for immediate surrender. The creditor is an entity named Apex Ventures. They acquired the $3 million promissory note. Julian staggered, catching himself against the stone mantel. Apex Ventures, he choked out, the name entirely foreign to him. I do not owe money to a corporate firm. I owe the Chicago syndicate. They cannot foreclose on this house. This property is free and clear. Harper built it. Thomas flipped to the second page, his eyes darting across the appended covenants. A sick, hollow sound escaped his throat. It is not free and clear anymore. Julian, you signed a quitclaim deed yesterday. You did not just take the title. You signed a liability assumption rider buried in the transfer contract. Evelyn stepped closer, clutching her pearl necklace. What does that mean? Thomas, explain it to us. It means Julian legally tethered his commercial business debts to this physical address. Thomas explained, the harsh reality crushing his remaining pride. The moment he signed that deed, this house became the primary commercial collateral for his defaulted venture capital loan. The Chicago syndicate sold the toxic debt to Apex Ventures. Apex Ventures is now exercising their right to collect. Julian stared at his hands. The realization hit him with staggering force. He thought he had outsmarted me. He believed he bullied his vulnerable sister into surrendering a $500,000 asset. Instead, he had walked into a meticulously designed legal snare. I had handed him a pristine house equipped with a hidden financial detonator, and he had willingly pressed the trigger. He legally transformed a suburban residence into commercial collateral to absorb a toxic debt he could never repay. Thomas flipped to the final page of the notice, his breathing shallow and erratic. There is an acceleration clause execution order. He continued, his voice barely audible over the soft jazz music still playing from the ceiling speakers. Because the loan is in active default, Apex Ventures has secured a judicial mandate for immediate asset reclamation. He looked up, his eyes sweeping across the lavish party. The document stipulates that this property is no longer a private residence. It is a foreclosed commercial asset. Every individual currently on the premises must evacuate within 120 minutes. Anyone remaining inside after the 2-hour deadline will be arrested for commercial trespassing. The declaration hung in the air, a lethal poison seeping into the lungs of everyone present. 2 hours. They had 120 minutes before the authorities arrived to physically throw them onto the street. The reaction from the elite guests was instantaneous and merciless. In the circles of the ultra-wealthy, financial contagion is treated like a terminal disease. Nobody wanted their reputation stained by association with a federal fraudster facing active foreclosure. The subtle whispers morphed into decisive action. A prominent local developer, a man Thomas had been courting all evening, set his half-empty crystal glass on a side table. He did not offer a sympathetic goodbye. He simply gestured to his wife, turned his back on my father, and walked toward the exit. The rest of the attendees followed suit, moving with a fast, urgent cadence. They abandoned their plates of expensive hors d'oeuvres. They left their coats in the hallway closet, preferring to brave the evening chill rather than spend another minute inside a seized property. Evelyn chased after them, her pristine socialite facade crumbling into pathetic desperation. "Wait, please," she begged, grabbing the silk sleeve of a venture capitalist wife. "This is just a misunderstanding. A clerical mistake. We have lawyers reviewing this right now. Please stay for dessert." We imported the pastries from France. The woman gently but firmly removed Evelyn and her fingers from her sleeve. "Call us when your legal troubles are resolved." "Evelyn," she replied, delivering the ultimate high society dismissal. The woman stepped through the doorway, leaving my mother standing alone on the imported rug. Within 10 minutes, the sprawling house was deserted by the guests. The caterer, recognizing a sinking ship, signaled his staff. The waiters stopped circulating. They began rolling their hot boxes and silver trays toward the service exit with brutal efficiency. "You cannot just leave," Thomas snapped, turning his residual anger toward the catering manager. "We have a contract." The manager paused at the threshold, holding a stack of unpaid invoices. "Your credit cards are returning federal fraud locks, and you are being evicted by a corporate holding firm. I will let the local authorities handle the theft of services charge." The manager turned his back, leading his crew out the side door, leaving the Montgomery family entirely isolated in the ruins of their extravagant celebration. The opulent living room now felt vast and echoing. Half-empty champagne flutes littered the countertops. The string quartet had packed their instruments and slipped out the back. Julian sank onto the custom leather sofa, burying his face in his hands. The syndicate was not coming to break his legs. A faceless corporation had done something far worse. They stripped him of his shelter, his pride, and his fake empire with a single stack of paper. Thomas paced the floor, running his hands through his thinning hair. "We have to call an attorney. We need to file a stay of execution. There has to be a loophole in the liability covenant." "There is no loophole," Julian mumbled through his fingers. "I waived my right to retroactive dispute. I signed it. I gave them the house. I gave them everything." The digital clock on the kitchen microwave ticked forward. 1 hour and 45 minutes remaining. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating, broken only by Evelyn and her quiet, disbelieving sobs near the entryway. They had thrown a party to project invincibility, only to provide an audience for their ultimate humiliation. Then, the rhythmic, sharp click of high heels echoed from the front porch. The front double doors, still left ajar by the fleeing guests, were pushed open wide. The family looked up, expecting to see police officers arriving early to enforce the trespassing mandate. Instead, Maya stepped over the threshold. She was no longer wearing the white lace of a devoted bride or the practical clothes of a hospital visitor. She wore a tailored, blood-red power suit that radiated lethal intent. She carried a sleek leather briefcase, and her dark eyes locked onto Julian with the precise, calculating focus of a predator cornering wounded prey. The final legal reckoning had arrived at their doorstep. Maya stood framed in the double doors. The warm Florida breeze caught the edge of her tailored red blazer. She stepped into the foyer. Her heels struck the hardwood floor with a sharp, methodical cadence. She did not look like the woman who had smiled politely at their country club dinners for the past 2 years. She looked like a judge arriving to read a final verdict. Julian pushed himself off the custom leather sofa, his eyes locked onto her with a sudden pathetic surge of hope. He ignored the foreclosure notices scattered across the imported rug. He saw the brilliant corporate compliance director he had manipulated. He believed her presence meant salvation. In his fractured mind, he thought Maya had come to rescue him from the corporate guillotine. "Maya," Julian gasped, his voice cracking as he stumbled across the room. "Thank God you are here. My sister transferred this house to me, but it was a trap. Some corporate entity called Apex Ventures bought my venture capital debt and triggered an immediate foreclosure. They are trying to throw us on the street." You have to help me fight this. You know commercial law better than anyone. Find a loophole. Maya. Please. He reached out, extending his trembling hands to grasp her shoulders. He wanted to pull her into a desperate embrace to use her intellect as a shield against the incoming ruin. Maya did not yield. She took a swift, calculated step backward. The distance she created was physical and undeniable. Julian's hands grabbed empty air. Do not touch me, Julian, she commanded. Her voice was an icy whisper that carried effortlessly across the vast living room. Julian froze. His hands dropped to his sides. He blinked rapidly, trying to process her profound rejection. Maya, we can fix this, he pleaded, taking another hesitant step forward. I know the wedding ended terribly, but I was just trying to secure our future. Everything I did was for us. We are a team. We are family. We were never a team, Maya replied, her dark eyes narrowing with surgical precision. We were a predator and a target. You needed a pristine credit history to secure your fraudulent venture capital loan. You needed a compliance director to unknowingly launder your reputation. You stole my social security number to fund a Ponzi scheme. You risked my freedom to pay your shadow syndicate. Thomas stepped forward from the kitchen island, attempting to salvage the situation. Maya, let us be reasonable, Thomas interrupted, trying to summon his fading patriarchal authority. Julian made some misguided financial choices, but we are dealing with a severe corporate crisis right now. We have less than 90 minutes before a property management firm throws us out. We need your legal expertise to file a stay of execution. We can handle internal family grievances later. Maya shifted her gaze to my father. She viewed him with unvarnished pity. There is no later, Thomas. There is no stay of execution. The clock ran out on your entire bloodline the moment you handed me that microphone at the reception. She unclasped her sleek leather briefcase. She pulled out a thin, crisp document bearing the official seal of the state court. She held it out, dropping it onto the coffee table right next to the scattered foreclosure notices. I filed for an annulment first thing this morning. Maya announced, the words echoing against the high ceilings. The marriage is void. I submitted the requisite evidence, proving the union was predicated on severe financial fraud. You have no wife, Julian. You have no legal shield. Julian stared at the annulment decree. His mouth opened, but his vocal cords failed him. The last remaining pillar of his fake reality snapped. The brilliant bride he intended to use as his legal defense had legally severed her ties to his sinking ship. But Maya was just getting started. She reached into her briefcase a second time, extracting a much thicker folder. An annulment only protects my future. Maya continued, her tone dropping to a lethal calm. It does not erase the fact that you committed identity theft to secure a $3 million loan. It does not erase the fact that you forged my signature on federal guarantor forms. Julian backed away, his eyes wide with rising terror. Maya, what did you do? I did exactly what a licensed corporate compliance officer is required to do when they uncover a staggering financial crime, Maya stated. I compiled the forged loan documents. I downloaded your decentralized cryptocurrency ledgers. I mapped the entire fraudulent structure of your artificial intelligence startup. And then I handed every single page of that evidence over to the federal authorities. The air in the room grew stale. Thomas grabbed the edge of the marble counter, his knuckles turning a stark, pale white. The Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation received the dossier this morning, Maya revealed, delivering the fatal blow. The Securities and Exchange Commission is currently reviewing your fabricated revenue projections. You are not just facing an eviction today, Julian. Federal agents are already mobilizing. They are securing warrants for wire fraud, identity theft, and securities manipulation. Julian let out a raw, agonizing wail. His legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed onto the hardwood floor, gripping his hair with both hands. He curled into a tight, pathetic ball, rocking back and forth among the scattered legal papers. The arrogant groom who had bragged about his elite startup just hours ago was reduced to a weeping, paralyzed child. The stark reality of a 20-year federal prison sentence crushed his lungs. Evelyn watched her golden son break down on the floor. Her maternal instincts, wrapped in layers of elite entitlement, flared up. She abandoned her position near the entryway and marched toward Maya. Her face flushed a dangerous red, her eyes burning with misplaced indignation. "How dare you!" Evelyn shrieked, pointing a shaking finger directly at Maya's face. "How dare you walk into this house and destroy my son? You are a traitor." Family protects. Family Maya. We opened our doors to you. We welcomed you into high society. And you repay us by running to the police like a cowardly informant. You are trying to ruin his life over a simple business mistake. Maya did not flinch. She stood tall, her red suit radiating unyielding power. She looked at Evelyn, the woman who had spent the last 2 years subtly criticizing Maya, clothing choices, and questioning her career ambitions. Evelyn always believed her status as a wealthy real estate wife made her untouchable. Maya reached into her briefcase one final time. She pulled out a heavily annotated financial ledger. She did not hand it to Evelyn. She threw it. The bound pages hit Evelyn in the chest and clattered to the floor right next to her trembling son. "Do not lecture me about family loyalty," Evelyn Maya fired back, her voice sharp as a razor. "And do not pretend this is about a simple business mistake. Your hands are just as dirty as his." Evelyn took a physical step backward, her righteous anger faltering. She looked down at the ledger on the floor, then back up at Maya. "I have nothing to do with Julian's startup." Evelyn stammered, her voice losing its shrill edge. "I am just a mother supporting her child." "You are a money launderer," Maya corrected, stripping away Evelyn's pristine socialite facade. "You set up a fake consulting business to wash the capital Thomas stole from his own employee pension fund. I tracked the routing numbers, Evelyn. I watched the deposits hit your personal accounts. You used the stolen retirement savings of your administrative staff to buy designer handbags, maintain your country club status, and fund Julian's fake empire." Evelyn's mouth fell open. She looked at Thomas, seeking reassurance, seeking a lie that could protect her from the exposure. But Thomas refused to meet her gaze. He stared at the floor, his silence confirming every word Maya spoke. "I included your consulting ledgers in the federal dossier," Maya told Evelyn, watching the older woman crumble. "The Internal Revenue Service is fully aware that you evaded taxes on millions of dollars in stolen pension funds. The financial police are not just coming for Julian today. They are coming for both of you." Evelyn's knees buckled. She sank onto the edge of the leather sofa, burying her face in her hands. She let out a series of broken, hollow sobs. The realization that she traded her freedom for a few more years of fake luxury finally broke her mind. She would trade her silk dresses for a standard-issue prison uniform. The elite friends she tried so desperately to impress would read her indictment in the morning paper. Thomas stood, silent, defeated, stripped of all authority. His firm was ruined. His son was a federal criminal. His wife was an exposed money launderer. He looked at the foreclosure notice, still resting on the coffee table. He had 75 minutes left before the property management firm arrived to throw them onto the street, but the street was no longer their biggest problem. The sound of distant sirens began to echo through the quiet suburban neighborhood. "You brought this on yourselves," Maya said, looking down at the ruined family. "You thought you could build a kingdom by stealing from everyone around you. You thought the people you stepped on would never fight back." Maya turned on her heel, her red heels clicking against the hardwood. She walked toward the open front door, leaving them drowning in the wreckage of their own greed. She stopped at the threshold and looked back over her shoulder. By the way, Maya added a final note of terrifying finality lingering in her voice. Apex Ventures did not just buy Julian debt by coincidence. You might want to ask yourselves who actually possesses the capital, the technical skill, and the profound motivation to acquire a $3 million loan just to foreclose on this specific address. Thomas raised his head. His eyes widened. The gears in his mind grinded together, connecting the impossible dots. The timing of the quitclaim deed. The immediate foreclosure. The flawless execution of the digital lockdown. Before Thomas could speak, a sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway. The tires crunched softly against the pavement. The engine cut off. The driver's side door opened, and a figure stepped out into the humid Florida evening. The true architect of their total destruction had finally arrived to survey the ruins. The engine of my hired sedan idled in the driveway, a low hum cutting through the humid evening air. I stepped onto the concrete, smoothing the lapels of my tailored emerald suit. The color was a deliberate echo of the dress I wore when my father struck me down. A thick white bandage covered my right temple, securing the 8 stitches resting beneath the fabric. The physical wound remained fresh and tender, yet my posture carried zero vulnerability. I walked toward the open double doors of the house I built. Behind me, 2 men exited a separate vehicle. They were independent security contractors, former military operators I retained for this specific confrontation. They wore unmarked dark suits, moving with silent, predatory grace. They flanked me, forming an impenetrable human shield. I crossed the threshold. The foyer smelled of spilled champagne and raw panic. The lively housewarming had deteriorated into a graveyard of abandoned, half-empty glasses and scattered legal papers. Evelyn sat weeping on the edge of the leather sofa, her face buried in her hands, her pristine socialite facade reduced to ruins. Julian remained curled on the floor, clutching his hair, muttering incoherent pleas to a deity he had ignored his entire life. Thomas stood near the fireplace. His face was a canvas of gray exhaustion. The moment his eyes registered my presence, the shock morphed into an ugly, familiar rage. He operated on decades of unchecked authority. He saw the daughter who had always bent to his will, the woman he thought he had successfully extorted. He lunged. He raised his hand, curling his fingers into a tight fist, fully intending to replicate the assault from the wedding reception. He wanted to bludgeon me back into submission. He never reached me. My security detail closed the distance in a fraction of a second. The lead contractor stepped squarely into my father's path, planting a heavy hand firmly against his chest. The impact halted the older man instantly. The second contractor flanked him, resting a hand casually near his beltline. A silent, lethal warning. Thomas stumbled backward, his dress shoes slipping on the polished wood. He looked at the 2 towering men, his patriarchal dominance evaporating against actual physical force. "How dare you show your face here?" Thomas roared, spit flying from his lips. He pointed a trembling finger around the human shield protecting me. "You brought this disaster upon us. You surrendered this property to Julian. You signed the quitclaim deed. You have no legal right to step foot inside this residence. Get out before I call the local police and have you arrested for trespassing." I did not flinch. I signaled my guards to hold their perimeter. I stepped around Thomas, ignoring his frantic sputtering. I walked directly to the center of the living room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor I had painstakingly sourced 2 years ago. I reached the glass coffee table. The notice of emergency foreclosure lay among the scattered party napkins. I picked up the crisp document, tracing the embossed seal with my index finger. Julian peeked through his fingers, his eyes red and swollen. Evelyn stopped crying for a brief second, staring at me with hollow confusion. "You think you won?" Thomas spat, pacing near the entryway, keeping a safe distance from my security team. "You think watching us deal with a corporate eviction makes you superior? We will hire attorneys. We will tie this up in civil court for a decade. Julian will file for bankruptcy protection. We will drain this property of its equity before we ever let some faceless holding company take it from us." I let him finish his desperate rant. I reached into the interior pocket of my emerald blazer. My fingers brushed against a thick, premium cardstock. I pulled the rectangular business card from my pocket. I did not hand it to him politely. I flicked my wrist. Tossing the card through the air, it fluttered downward, landing directly on his pristine leather shoes. "Pick it up," I instructed, my voice dropping to a glacial, uncompromising pitch. Thomas glared at me, his pride warring with his curiosity. He slowly bent his knees, groaning slightly as he retrieved the card from the floor. He held it up to the ambient light of the chandelier. His eyes scanned the embossed silver lettering. I watched his pupils dilate. I watched the final, foundational pillar of his reality snap cleanly in half. The text on the card was simple. Apex Ventures, LLC. Chief Executive Officer. Harper Montgomery. Thomas stopped breathing. The card slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the floor with a soft tap. His jaw went slack. He looked at the foreclosure notice in my hand, then back to the business card, his brain struggling to bridge the gap between his arrogant assumptions and the lethal trap he had willingly walked into. "It is me," I stated, breaking the suffocating silence. "There is no faceless holding company. There is no anonymous corporate predator. I am your creditor. I used my blind entity to purchase the $3 million promissory note from the Chicago syndicate. I bought your debt for pennies on the dollar because your son is a severe liability. I own the loan you used Maya's stolen identity to secure." Julian let out a choked gasp, scrambling backward until his back hit the base of the sofa. He stared at me as if looking at an apparition. "You bought my debt," Julian whispered, his voice cracking. "You are Apex Ventures. You triggered the default. You signed the quitclaim deed." "Julian," I reminded him, waving the foreclosure notice in the air. "You were so hungry to steal my wealth that you failed to read the liability assumption rider. You legally tied your fraudulent venture capital debt to this physical address. By transferring the property, you handed me the legal authorization to seize it right back. You did not conquer me. You essentially handed me the keys to your own execution." I turned my gaze toward my mother. Evelyn clutched a decorative throw pillow to her chest, her face a mask of pure terror. She shrank back into the cushions, trying to make herself as small as possible. And because Thomas co-signed the original guarantor forms to protect his precious son, I continued, twisting the blade. "My company now holds the power to seize your assets as well. You stole employee pensions to fund a fake tech startup. You embezzled from your own brokerage. Maya sent that evidence to the federal authorities. But I am the one holding the civil leverage. I possess the legal authority to drain every remaining cent you have hidden." Thomas stood speechless. The man who had struck me with a brass centerpiece just days ago was now shrinking before my eyes. He looked fragile, exhausted, and utterly ruined. The illusion of his elite status lay shattered alongside his son's fraudulent empire. "I told you this house was not a charity handout," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I built this sanctuary. I paid for the foundation. You thought you could use physical force to extort my labor. Instead, you locked yourselves inside a cage of your own design. I am officially evicting you from my property. You have less than an hour to vacate the premises before my security team throws you onto the lawn." The silence that followed was total. My family stood paralyzed, suffocating under the weight of my orchestrated vengeance. I had stripped them of their wealth, their pride, and their shelter. They had nothing left to leverage, no connections to call upon, and no escape routes to exploit. Civil foreclosure was the first wave of the assault, stripping their armor away. Beyond the closed front doors, the distant wail of sirens began to pierce the humid night air. The pitch multiplied, growing louder, sharper, and more numerous. Red and blue lights began to reflect against the tall glass windows of the living room. The civil penalty was delivered. Now, the federal reckoning was parking right on our doorstep. The wail of the approaching sirens tore through the humid Florida evening. The noise swelled from a distant hum into a deafening shriek that rattled the tall glass windows of the living room. Flashing red and blue strobe lights pierced the darkness outside, projecting erratic, terrified shadows of my family across the freshly painted walls. The civil eviction was merely the opening act. The federal authorities had arrived to deliver the final judgment. Julian scrambled backward on his hands and knees, His expensive leather shoes slipped against the polished hardwood floor. He bumped into the edge of the velvet sofa, his breath coming in short, frantic gasps. He stared at the front door, expecting it to burst open at any second. The arrogant groom, who had strutted through a luxury hotel ballroom just 3 days ago, was now trembling like a trapped animal. Thomas stood rigid near the fireplace, his jaw locked tight. He watched the rotating lights illuminate the front lawn. For decades, he had controlled every narrative. He dictated the rules of our household and managed a commercial real estate firm with an iron fist. He believed his status shielded him from consequence. Now the blinding glare of law enforcement spotlights exposed the fragile reality of his criminal existence. My private security contractors stepped back, clearing a wide path through the foyer. They recognized the incoming operational shift and yielded the floor to the federal government. Heavy boots pounded against the concrete steps of the front porch. The front double doors swung open wide. Beams of intense white tactical flashlights sliced through the ambient lighting of the living room. A dozen armed individuals flooded the entryway, moving with swift, uncompromising precision. They wore dark tactical vests emblazoned with bold yellow lettering, identifying them as special agents from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Local Miami police officers flanked them, securing the perimeter to prevent any escape. Federal agents. "Keep your hands where we can see them," a lead investigator shouted, his voice carrying a harsh, unyielding authority that silenced the room. Thomas raised his palms, attempting to salvage his fractured dignity. He straightened his spine, trying to summon the remnants of his patriarchal persona. "Officers, there is a misunderstanding here," he stated, his voice wavering only slightly. "I am Thomas Montgomery. I am a respected executive in this city. You are trespassing on private property. We are dealing with a civil dispute regarding my daughter." The lead agent did not slow his stride. He holstered his flashlight and closed the distance in 3 rapid steps. He grabbed Thomas by the lapels of his custom-tailored suit, spinning the older man around. He shoved Thomas forward, pressing his chest flat against the cold surface of the marble kitchen island. The loud thud of bone hitting stone echoed sharply. "Thomas Montgomery," the agent declared, pulling a pair of heavy-duty handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for embezzlement of employee pension funds and federal tax evasion." A local Miami police officer stepped up beside the federal agent, pulling a separate warrant from his utility belt. "We are adding a state charge to that list," the officer announced, pointing a stern finger directly at my father. "We have a sworn statement and medical records confirming felony assault with a deadly weapon." The officer glanced over at the thick white bandage resting on my right temple. Thomas had swung a brass centerpiece, intending to silence me. Instead, he had handed the authorities the exact physical evidence required to lock him in a state penitentiary, regardless of his financial crimes. The heavy steel cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, securing his hands tightly behind his back. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, his cheek pressed against the marble stripped of his wealth, his freedom, and his pride. Across the room, Julian realized the front door was heavily guarded. Panic overrode his logic. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward the rear patio doors, hoping to vanish into the dark suburban backyard. He did not make it past the dining table. 2 federal agents anticipated the flight risk. They intercepted him, tackling him to the floor. Julian thrashed wildly, kicking his legs and sobbing. His desperate resistance proved entirely futile against the trained officers. They hauled him upward, grabbing him firmly under the armpits and lifting him to his feet. His tailored trousers were wrinkled and covered in dust. Julian Montgomery, a second investigator, read aloud, staring at the weeping man. "You are being detained on multiple federal indictments. The charges include securities manipulation, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. We have the forged loan documents bearing your former fiancé's signature." Julian broke down completely. Tears streamed down his face, leaving dark streaks across his cheeks. He begged the agents to let him call a lawyer. He pleaded for Maya, claiming she could clear his name. He sounded pathetic, a hollow shell of the man who had mocked my practical clothing and bragged about his fake tech startup. He was going to spend the best years of his life in a federal cell, paying for a deceptive empire built on stolen credit. Evelyn watched her husband and her son face their ruin. She stood frozen near the hallway, her hands covering her mouth. The pristine socialite facade she had meticulously maintained for 40 years melted away. Her country club friends, her luxury shopping trips, her perceived superiority, it all evaporated in the span of 60 seconds. She recognized the lethal reality of her situation. She had laundered the stolen pension money through fake consulting fees. The authorities knew her name. They held the digital ledgers tracking her criminal complicity. She looked at Thomas, pinned to the counter. She looked at Julian, sobbing in the grip of the agents. Then her wide, terrified eyes locked onto me. I stood near the edge of the living room, my posture straight, my expression carved from ice. I wore my tailored emerald suit, projecting the calm authority of an apex predator, observing the aftermath of a successful hunt. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. Evelyn stumbled forward, her knees shaking so badly she could barely walk. She closed the distance between us, dropping to the floor right at my feet. The haughty mother who had always favored my sister and treated me like a disposable servant was now groveling on the hardwood. "Harper, please!" Evelyn wailed, her voice cracking under the weight of her despair. Tears ruined her expensive makeup, running in jagged lines down her chin. "You have to stop this. You are a risk analyst. You know corporate law. You have money. Tell them we made a mistake. Tell them you forgive your father for the wedding. Please just say one word to help us. We are your family. You cannot let them take us away." She reached out her trembling fingers, grabbing the hem of my suit trousers. She looked up at me, her eyes begging for a miraculous rescue. She expected the quiet, obedient daughter to emerge and shield them from the consequences of their own malicious actions. I looked down at the weeping woman. I remembered every holiday dinner where she belittled my career. I remembered her smirking while Thomas demanded I sign over my house. I remembered the cold indifference she displayed when I lay bleeding on the hotel ballroom floor. I stepped back, pulling the fabric of my trousers free from her desperate grasp. I stared at her, ensuring my voice carried the chill of a finalized execution. "You once told me my job was to stay behind and clean up the family trash." I replied, my words slicing through the heavy tension of the room. Evelyn caught her breath, her eyes widening as the memory of her own cruel insult returned to haunt her. "And that is exactly what I am doing," I finished. A fresh wave of agonizing sobs tore from her throat. She collapsed onto her hands and knees, realizing the bridge between us was burned to ash. The daughter she had dismissed as a failure was the architect of her destruction, and I offered zero salvation. The lead federal agent signaled to his team. The officers began marching the prisoners toward the front door. Thomas walked with a pronounced limp, his head bowed to hide his face from the flashing lights outside. Julian continued to cry, his shoulders shaking as the agents guided him through the entryway. 2 local police officers stepped forward to assist Evelyn, pulling her up from the floor and escorting her out of the house. I followed them to the threshold, standing in the open doorway. The humid night air washed over my face. The quiet suburban street was no longer peaceful. Neighbors stood on their manicured lawns, holding smartphones up to record the spectacle. The wealthy residents of Miami watched as the Montgomery family was paraded across the grass in handcuffs. The reputation Thomas had fiercely protected was broadcasted as a criminal scandal in real time. The officers placed my father and brother into separate transport vehicles. The heavy metal doors slammed shut, sealing their fates. The engines roared to life, the sirens remaining silent as the convoy slowly pulled away from the curb. The red and blue strobe lights faded down the street, leaving my neighborhood in quiet shadows once more. My security contractor stood nearby, waiting for my next directive. The house was empty. The invaders were purged. The stolen capital was reclaimed, and the physical threat was neutralized. I turned around and walked back inside the foyer. The house I built from scratch felt different now. It was no longer a battleground. It was a fortress. The legal and emotional warfare had reached its climax, but the dust was still settling. I needed to secure the remaining loose ends before the sun came up, ensuring that my newfound freedom remained permanent. The flashing lights of the police convoy disappeared around the corner, leaving my quiet suburban street bathed in darkness. I stood on the porch, letting the cool night breeze wash over my face. Across the manicured lawns, the suburban audience remained rooted to their driveways. Smartphones were held high, capturing the remnants of the scandal. Tomorrow morning, the country club group chats and neighborhood forums would ignite with the footage. The Montgomery name, once synonymous with wealth and elite status, was now a cautionary tale of white-collar crime. I turned my back on the staring neighbors and walked inside, locking the heavy oak door. The silence in the foyer felt different now. It was no longer a battleground waiting for an ambush. It was a reclaimed sanctuary. The swiftness of the justice system rarely matches the speed of financial ruin, but my meticulous evidence package accelerated the timeline. By Tuesday morning, the federal prosecutors unsealed the indictments. Julian sat in a concrete holding cell, trading his tailored tuxedo for a drab orange jumpsuit. He faced a mandatory minimum of 20 years for wire fraud and securities manipulation. His defense attorney, appointed by the state, informed him that his decentralized cryptocurrency wallets were empty. Apex Ventures had legally seized every digital token to satisfy the defaulted Shadow Syndicate loan. Julian possessed zero leverage to negotiate a plea deal. Maya expedited the annulment process, ensuring her name was permanently severed from his toxic legacy. He sat on a metal cot staring at the cinder block wall, grappling with a reality he could not manipulate. The charming groom was reduced to a federal inmate number. Thomas fared no better under the crushing weight of the federal probe. The Securities and Exchange Commission partnered with the Internal Revenue Service to raid his commercial real estate brokerage. Federal agents carried boxes of physical ledgers and hard drives out of his pristine downtown office. The news anchors covered the raid on live television, exposing his embezzlement scheme to the entire eastern seaboard. The government froze his remaining assets, redirecting the recovered capital back into the employee pension funds he had so ruthlessly drained. His wealthy investors treated his name like a contagion. The men who drank his scotch and praised his business acumen scrambled to distance themselves, issuing public statements of profound betrayal. Thomas lost his firm, his freedom, and his prized patriarchal authority. He faced a staggering prison sentence, destined to age behind electrified wire, knowing his own arrogance paved the road to his destruction. Evelyn managed to avoid a direct federal indictment by claiming ignorance of the pension fraud, but her survival came at a steep, agonizing price. The civil asset forfeiture stripped her of everything. The government seized the luxury cars, the offshore accounts, and her sprawling estate to pay restitution. She found herself standing on the curb of a decaying strip mall, clutching a single suitcase containing a few basic clothing items. The pristine socialite was forced to rent a cramped single room in a rundown boarding house on the outskirts of the city. The walls were thin. The plumbing groaned. She sat on a sagging mattress, pulling out her smartphone to dial the numbers of her elite friends. She called the women she used to host for charity luncheons, hoping for a generous loan or a place to stay. The calls went straight to voicemail. Her fellow country club members blocked her number, refusing to associate with the wife of a convicted embezzler. Evelyn spent her days pacing the stained linoleum floor of her tiny room, suffocating under the weight of her social exile. The woman who once wore diamond necklaces and criticized my practical wardrobe was now invisible. She had traded her daughter for a mirage, and the mirage had finally evaporated, leaving her stranded in a barren wasteland. Back in the suburbs, I initiated the final stage of my real estate reclamation. Apex Ventures formally executed the foreclosure, rendering Julian's signature on the quitclaim deed a binding mechanism of his own defeat. The court recognized my corporate entity as the sole rightful owner. I hired a specialized biohazard cleaning crew to purge the property. They arrived early Wednesday morning, wearing industrial suits and carrying heavy-duty trash bags. I instructed them to remove every trace of my family, short-lived occupation. They hauled away the half-empty wine glasses, the scattered foreclosure notices, and the residual garbage left from the aborted housewarming party. They scrubbed the hardwood floors and sanitized the marble countertops, erasing the scent of expensive perfume and cheap cigar smoke. I walked through the empty rooms, listening to the quiet hum of the central air conditioning. The structural integrity of the house remained flawless. I had built this home using the profits of my own grueling labor. My parents tried to convert it into a monument for their golden son, but the foundation rejected them. The true depth of their punishment was not merely the loss of their wealth or the looming threat of federal prison. The ultimate psychological blow was the identity of their executioner. For 3 decades, they labeled me a quiet failure. They dismissed my analytical career as a boring desk job. They demanded I stay behind to babysit, treating me as an unpaid servant, unworthy of their tropical vacations. They built their towering egos by standing on my neck. Now, as they sat in their respective prisons and cramped boarding rooms, they were forced to replay the events of the past week. They had to digest the undeniable fact that the spinster sister engineered their downfall with mathematical precision. They tried to outsmart a venture capital risk analyst using amateur financial crimes. I did not just defeat them. I orchestrated a scenario where they happily signed their own death warrants. I handed them the rope, and they eagerly tied the knot. The realization that I controlled the shadow corporation that bought their debt shattered their fragile minds. I was Apex Ventures. I owned the leverage. I possessed the intellect and the capital they so desperately craved. They were ruined by the very person they deemed too weak to matter. I opened my laptop on the pristine kitchen island, reviewing the final compliance reports Maya forwarded from her hotel suite. Our unlikely alliance had proven devastatingly effective. Maya severed her legal ties to Julian with surgical efficiency, shielding her own corporate career from the blast radius of his Ponzi scheme. Her annulment was a matter of public record, clearing her name of his toxic debt. She sent me a brief encrypted message confirming the federal agents had successfully secured the stolen identity files. The syndicate in Chicago retreated into the shadows, recognizing the heat of a federal investigation made Julian an untouchable target. The physical threat was neutralized by the overwhelming presence of the justice system. I typed a quick response to Maya, acknowledging her update. We forged a bond built in the fires of mutual betrayal, and we emerged without a single burn. I poured a cup of black coffee, savoring the rich, bitter aroma. The house was mine. My finances were insulated. The threats were eradicated. A venture capital analyst never leaves loose ends unverified. I needed to ensure the legal firewall protecting my assets could withstand any desperate appeals from a public defender. I accessed the state court database, checking the docket for Thomas and Julian upcoming arraignments. The prosecutors filed motions to deny bail, citing the sheer volume of stolen capital and the severity of the flight risk. The judge agreed. They were staying behind bars until the trial commenced. Evelyn attempted one final maneuver. A cheap lawyer she hired using the last remnants of her pawned jewelry sent a demand letter to my corporate counsel. The letter threatened a civil suit, claiming I manipulated the real estate transfer under false pretenses. The desperation leaked through the poorly drafted legal jargon. She wanted me to pay her a settlement to drop the frivolous lawsuit, hoping I would fold to avoid a public dispute. I did not flinch. I forwarded the letter to Marcus, my retaining attorney, with a single instruction. I told him to reply with a countersuit for the emotional damages and physical assault sustained at the wedding reception, accompanied by the medical records documenting my fractured skull. I also instructed him to include the surveillance photos of Thomas stealing my keys from my purse while I lay bleeding on the floor. Marcus executed the response within an hour. Evelyn Lawyer dropped her as a client the very next day, refusing to engage in a battle against irrefutable video evidence of a felony assault. Her final attempt to extort my wealth crumbled into dust. She was truly alone. I stood near the large bay window, watching the morning sun rise over the suburban landscape. The light caught the edge of the new deadbolt I installed on the front door. The brass fixture gleamed a silent testament to the impenetrable barrier I erected between my future and their toxicity. The quiet was no longer a symbol of my forced submission. It was the sound of my definitive triumph. I turned away from the window, preparing to meet Maya for a celebratory lunch downtown. We had survived an ambush and dismantled an empire. The board was cleared and the pieces were swept away. The next phase of my life was waiting, and I held the only key. 6 months later. The warm, salty breeze of the Atlantic Ocean sweeps across the private rooftop terrace. The evening sun dips below the Miami skyline, casting long, golden shadows over the pristine infinity pool. I sit in a plush white linen cabana chair, tracing the faint, smooth white line near my right temple. The skin has healed perfectly. The physical reminder of the brass centerpiece is now just a closed chapter. A quiet testament to the night my life permanently shifted. This exclusive penthouse resort is not a random vacation destination. It is the exact honeymoon reservation Julian booked using stolen corporate credit cards. When the federal authorities seized his fraudulent accounts, the hotel management canceled his itinerary. My holding company stepped in, cleared the defaulted ledger, and purchased the reservation using clean, legitimate capital. We reclaimed the space. We transformed a crime scene of fake wealth into a genuine celebration of hard-earned triumph. The sliding glass door opens, and Maya steps onto the terrace. She wears a sharp, tailored ivory suit that contrasts flawlessly with the vibrant sunset. She carries 2 crystal glasses of vintage Pinot Noir, handing one to me with a knowing, confident smile. We clink the glasses together, the crisp sound ringing out over the quiet hum of the city below. We sit back and discuss the trajectory of the past 6 months. Maya is no longer just a compliance director navigating the shadows of a deceitful fiancé. Her meticulous handling of the federal whistleblower dossier drew the attention of the highest tiers of the financial sector. The Securities and Exchange Commission praised her pristine forensic documentation. A rival Fortune 500 firm recognized her unparalleled intellect and recruited her within weeks. She sits across from me today as their newly appointed Vice President of Regulatory Affairs. Julian attempted to use her as a human shield to absorb his illicit debt. Instead, his ineptitude provided the exact high-stakes crisis she needed to showcase her brilliance. She dismantled a shadow syndicate network, and the corporate world rewarded her with a corner office and a 7-figure compensation package. We sip the dark red wine, letting the rich flavor settle. The conversation naturally shifts to the final, unrelenting gears of the justice system. The courts operate with a slow, grinding certainty, and the sentencing hearings concluded just last week. Thomas stood before a federal judge wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. His defense attorney pleaded for leniency, citing his age and his former standing in the commercial real estate community. The judge rejected the plea without a second thought. Stealing employee pension funds carries a severe, undeniable penalty. Thomas received a 15-year sentence in a medium-security facility. The proud patriarch who stood in a luxury ballroom and demanded I surrender my home will spend his twilight years sleeping on a thin metal cot. He is stripped of his tailored suits, his country club memberships, and his unearned dignity. He will age behind electrified wire, knowing his own towering ego paved the road to his destruction. Julian met a much darker fate. The prosecution stacked the wire fraud, the identity theft, and the unregistered securities violations into a lethal, inescapable combination. The presiding judge sentenced him to 20 years. The shadow syndicate in Chicago never collected their debt. But federal prison ensures Julian will never enjoy a single moment of freedom to spend another stolen dime. The charming groom who thought he could extort his sister to save his own skin is reduced to a federal inmate number. Evelyn avoided federal prison by turning state witness against her own husband. She traded her loyalty for a plea deal, throwing Thomas to the wolves to save herself. However, the government confiscated her remaining assets to pay restitution to the defrauded administrative employees. The former socialite now resides in a cramped, unair-conditioned studio apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. She works the cash register at a local discount retail store, scanning cheap merchandise for minimum wage. She stands on her feet for 9 hours a day under harsh fluorescent lighting, dealing with customers who do not even look her in the eye. The hands that once held crystal champagne flutes now crack and blister from handling cheap cardboard boxes. She returns home to a sagging mattress, eating canned soup in a kitchen that smells of damp mildew. Her elite friends blocked her number months ago. She exists in total isolation, surrounded only by the ghosts of her vanished luxury. The stark contrast between their concrete cells and our rooftop terrace is a flawless demonstration of cause and effect. My risk analysis firm experienced an unprecedented surge in revenue over the last 2 quarters. Apex Ventures expanded its portfolio, acquiring distressed assets and liquidating them for substantial profit. My net worth doubled the moment I stopped funneling my energy into earning the approval of people who viewed me as a disposable resource. My firm now dictates the terms for major corporate mergers. I sit across the table from industry titans, evaluating their vulnerabilities and exposing their hidden liabilities. Apex Ventures operates as a silent, formidable force in the financial sector. When I walk into a boardroom, I bring the same cold, calculating precision that dismantled my own family. The executives I negotiate with sense that underlying ruthlessness, and it grants me an unparalleled advantage in every single transaction. The $500,000 suburban house, the initial battleground, was sold to a private commercial developer at a steep premium. The physical structure was bulldozed to make way for a new corporate project. Every trace of their entitlement was literally wiped from the earth. I did not keep the property out of sentimentality. I liquidated it because a sharp investor knows when to cash out a winning hand and reinvest the capital. I look out at the dark ocean waves crashing against the pristine shoreline. The salt air fills my lungs, clean and unburdened. Maya checks her phone, smiling at an email from her executive board. We are 2 women who survived a direct collision with parasites. We did not merely survive the impact. We weaponized their greed and engineered a seamless, untouchable execution. Society often dictates that we must forgive our relatives. The cultural narrative insists that shared DNA requires an endless reservoir of tolerance, that we must endure abuse simply to keep the peace at a holiday dinner. I spent my 20s believing that if I worked hard enough, provided enough stability, and stayed out of the way, my parents would eventually grant me a seat at their table. They took that quiet loyalty and tried to mortgage my future. I watched my father swing a heavy brass object at my head because I dared to protect my own labor. I watched my brother plot to leave a brilliant woman facing a federal indictment. I set my crystal glass down on the smooth stone table. The sky turns a deep, bruised purple as the stars begin to emerge over the water. The silence up here is profound. There are no screaming demands for unpaid labor. There are no arrogant brothers flashing stolen watches. There are no mothers inspecting my apartment with sheer disdain. There is only the crisp, undeniable reality of a self-made empire. I lean back in the chair, feeling the cool evening breeze. The ultimate truth of my journey crystallizes in my mind, ringing with undeniable clarity. Blood is not a license to exploit. You are not obligated to turn yourself into a stepping stone for toxic people to walk on. True power does not lie in forgiving those who intentionally try to destroy you, but in the ability to build an empire so strong that no force can ever take it away. The Miami breeze rustles the palm fronds below our penthouse terrace. Maya and I finish our wine, the unspoken bond of surviving a betrayal cementing our alliance. We did not just escape a burning building. We locked the arsonists inside and bought the land it stood on. Sitting here, looking at the endless expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, the physical scar on my temple feels like a distant memory. The journey from a disregarded sister to the architect of a federal takedown fundamentally rewired my understanding of human nature. This grueling ordeal forged 3 undeniable truths. First, I learned that true security is engineered entirely through financial and intellectual independence. We are often conditioned to rely on the safety nets provided by our relatives, trusting that those closest to our bloodline will inherently protect our interests. My father and brother proved that proximity frequently breeds exploitation. By building my own corporate infrastructure in the shadows, I created an impenetrable fortress. Capital is not merely a tool for purchasing luxury. It is the ultimate armor. When you secure your own resources, you strip predators of their primary leverage. You dictate the terms of your own survival. Second, shared biology is never a valid currency for purchasing your subjugation. Society demands endless forgiveness for abusive parents or toxic siblings under the sacred guise of unconditional loyalty. I reject that premise entirely. Family is an action. It is a continuous, reciprocal exchange of mutual respect and protection. When individuals weaponize a genetic connection to bleed your legacy dry, walking away is not a betrayal. It is an act of profound self-preservation. Cutting the dead weight from your daily existence is the only way to ensure your empire continues to rise without heavy anchors dragging you into the dark. Finally, the most lethal response to blatant disrespect is strategic silence. When Julian and Thomas mocked my career and demanded my real estate, my initial human instinct was to scream, to fight, and to fiercely defend my worth. But engaging with an arrogant ego only validates its perceived power. By executing a calculated surrender, I fed their hubris. I handed them the deed, and their own monumental greed tied the knot. The greatest victories are never won in screaming matches across a crowded dining room. They are won in the quiet, methodical execution of a flawless countermeasure. Let your enemies celebrate a fabricated victory while you orchestrate their definitive ruin. The night sky over the Florida coastline is dark, clear, and perfectly quiet. My perimeter is secure, and my future belongs exclusively to me. Have you ever been pushed to the absolute edge by toxic relatives, only to use your own quiet brilliance to dismantle their entitlement? How did you construct your own boundaries and take back your power? Share your experiences in the comments below. If my journey to untouchable freedom resonated with your own struggles, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join our community here at Silent Vengeance Stories. Never apologize for choosing your own peace. I will see you in the next video.